I think you can hear me. Thank you. You're correct. This is a great opportunity for us to be here today. We're very excited and looking forward to an exciting presentation with you. My name's Mike Myers. I'm the fire chief with the City of Portland. I want to start off, Mayor and Commissioners, with a few thank yous. First, attending probably a little bit late is Bobby Regan. She is our Budget Advisory Committee member, so please excuse her when she arrives. I'll probably notice her to have a seat next to me. We want to thank her and Dr. Ju, who's sitting to my left also. You'll recognize him. They spend an inordinate amount of time with us. Many times our budget committee meetings run 2 hours or longer, and obviously they give a tremendous amount of their private time to come and help us along. I also wanted to thank the Citizens Advisory Committee to help us challenge us, make us think a little differently, help us find different ways to do business. So I know you spend a lot of time with the different bureaus doing different kinds of work, and I wanted to thank you personally as well. So many times around the table, we all have some thankless jobs, and I don't get this opportunity very often in public, but I want to thank personally the City Budget Office. Andrew, your team, you and Jessica specifically, you've been our business partner for a few months, and you've been at every budget advisory committee, and I wanted to thank you personally in your guidance in helping us put this together. Tom, thank you for your coach and counseling on some strategies and strategic plan and how to really balance our presentation today. I appreciate your personal efforts. So thank you, and Commissioner Saltzman, Gene Yamamoto has been outstanding, so thank you for loaning him out frequently to help us with the project as well. There's one other group in the building that I'd like to notice, and we can't get the bulk of our work done without good partnerships, and it takes a commitment from everyone. And I asked the president of Local 43 to be here today, Alan Ferschweiler, and his executive staff. Alan, I want to thank you for attending today. As you know, I can't get things done within the Bureau without your support, your commitment, your collaboration. So I want to thank you for attending today and your personal commitment with you and your team being at the Budget Advisory Committee and helping us put this budget together. So thank you. To my right, you'll see a couple of chief officers. We have Division Chief Ken Burns and Deputy Chief Sarah Boone. Also in the audience, Division Chief Tom Williams, Division Chief Nate Takara, our Budget Operations Lead, Jay Guo, and a couple of Deputy Chiefs, Deputy Chief Don Russ and Deputy Chief Vince Wilson. They do have work today to get done, so as soon as we're completed here, they will get back to their jobs. So thank you for being here, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you, Chiefs. I'm going to go through the slides. I'll try to flip a slide and then show you where we're at. So if you'll turn to your slide set for Portland Fire and Rescue, I will get on my job here with the slides. There we go. So we're on this slide here. Whoa. All right, so I'm going to start off by discussing our strategic plan. I do not intend that you will be able to read this slide. The strategic plan for the Portland Fire and Rescue is actually a large wall map. So if you've seen it before, we've had presentations on it. That wall map hangs in all 31 fire stations in the city of Portland so that every firefighter understands their role and how they impact the strategic plan and make us successful. In the center of I'm going to give you a little progress report on how our strategic plan is unfolding, where our progress has been to date, and how our sustainable budget is buried within the success of that strategic plan. Thank you, Bobby. Everybody knew you might be running a little bit behind, so welcome. Welcome, Bobby Reagan. Hey, Bobby. Thank you. Just make yourself comfortable there. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So right in the center of our strategic plan is a gray rectangle. That gray rectangle says on it that by 2020, we will be world-class. This is a 3-year strategic plan. It runs on the fiscal year, just like the normal fiscal year for budgeting. So it's from July to July. We are right in the middle of our very first year of the strategic plan. When you look at the slide set, just notice the 6 blue lines that lead from the center. Each one of those blue lines represents part of our organization. In the upper right-hand corner, it's operations. In the middle on the right, it's fire prevention with Nate Takara's office. The bottom right is training and medical services with Chief Burns here. Bottom left is Jay Guo, who manages finance and IT. In the middle is my area, organizational culture and climate. And the top left is Sarah Boone, Deputy Chief Boone, who does logistics. The reason I'm telling you this is every month we have a meeting where the executive comes in and goes over their section of performance measures in their area. If you'll look to the end of those blue lines, all those other lines are performance measures. And they report out. Every one of those performance measures are put into a scorecard, and they are delivered to us in an executive staff meeting every month. At that executive staff meeting are 20 to 30 individuals across the spectrum of our bureau that challenge that individual to move forward on their portion of the strategic plan.
Chief, can I just jump in one sec?
Anytime.
On this slide 2 on mine actually is the NCAA tournament chart.
Yes.
Somehow I think there's been a mistake.
No mistake.
Can I make a request just following this meeting? This is an incredible flow chart. It's just that we can't read it.
And I understand that.
Oh, you already addressed that?
I already addressed that, and we know that. And I wanted to bring
a bigger one.
I would love to bring a big wall map. The setting in here was not conducive to show the large wall map, so I didn't want to block anybody's view by showing it. Okay. You have had a previous presentation about it, so now I'm just kind of going over the background of it. I'm not really going over the performance measures right now. Okay. And remember, I'm from Vegas. So you and I can talk later about who to pick. I can help you out there if that's what you were alluding to.
We could get rich on this tournament.
Maybe. Okay. So I apologize for that. I would love to have a different arena where I can really get up and stand and point to different things on the wall map, but it simply was not conducive to today's delivery model. So I apologize for that. So the important part here is I want you to understand and have the confidence that Portland Fire Rescue is using what I believe is a very progressive business model to get our business done. We use the strategic plan, not just to write it into a booklet to sit on a bookshelf, but we use the strategic plan as part of our methodology and the way we do business. We operate through the strategic plan to get things done. In fact, every one of these sections that's related to a division chief, when I meet with them at their annual performance review, this is their performance review. Their job, this is a 3-year plan, their job is to get 33% of the plan completed every year. So during their annual performance review, I sit down and go over what 33% have you completed or where are you. They already know ahead of time what their performance review is going to be and what their expectations are going to be. This drives our business. The very success of them being a division chief depends on their ability to get these things done. I, in turn, take the entire wall map to Commissioner Saltzman's office, lay it out on the table, and I have asked him to hold me accountable to getting to 33% of the entire strategic plan completed every year. It's how I personally hold myself accountable to get the strategic plan completed. The reason I'm talking about it here today is for 2 reasons. One, to give you the confidence that we are driving our business forward with a good business process. But number 2, to understand that the stabilization of our budget is buried in the strategic plan. If we are able to complete this through this methodology, I believe we will stabilize our budget over the long term. I have no issue with the way we do budgeting today. I wait toward the later part of the year. I get noticed on what the budget cut will be. I go back, we scramble a little bit and come back forward with some recommendations for cuts and adds. It's not the most strategic methodology to budgeting. So in the background, I have a long-term stabilization budget ingrained in the strategic plan. Now this is just one 3-year plan. After we're completed, we'll have to add another one, so it does progress. But I want you to have the confidence that we understand that our budget is unsustainable. That if we continue to manage the Fire Bureau the way we've managed the Fire Bureau in the past, it will be unsustainable in the future. And if we continue to manage it the way we managed it in the past and expect different results, then I'm foolish. We are trying new ways. Your email, Mayor, on January 2nd asked us to try new ways, be innovative, think differently, collaborate, figure it out. That's why this portion of my discussion with you is trying to represent our action to do just that. Okay? Next slide. Next slide, Commissioner Fish, is just an example of what the larger wall map would look like. It is only marginally more readable, but still not. So this is an example of just one of the blue sections. This happens to be Division Chief Tom Williams' area in operations. Most of the items are measurable. Remember, when we started, we gave you a presentation about a year ago. We talked to you about what the strategic plan. And remember, all the performance measures were red in color. Red meant we hadn't started it. Yellow means we've started it, but we have significant obstacles. We're unsure how we're going to handle it. Green means it has been started and it's on track for completion. And blue means it's been completed. So you'll notice already by the mid-year on the first year of the strategic plan, we're making good progress on the bulk of the strategic plan. So we're super excited about that. Again, this is good progress going forward, okay? It's all color-coded. Again, we use this, we use a scorecard to track these, good morning, track these items.
So I don't understand it though, because you've got, I mean, obviously you get called to the red lines, and one of the red lines says evaluate and implement a plan to turn lift assist calls into fee for service, and that's in your budget this year.
That's
so
correct.
Why isn't that a yellow line or on track? Why isn't it green?
Well, as soon as you give us the go-ahead, we'll probably turn it from red to a different color. Right now, we haven't started anything yet. We recognize the issue. We know that we think we can do something, but if your direction today is that, yes, do something, we'll start working on it. We'll probably work on it anyway, because we think it's the right thing to do.
Well, I would suggest that it says evaluate, and so you've certainly started evaluating it, or you wouldn't have put it on the budget.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, so let me look. I think that's the last item I wanted to talk to you about on that slide. So let's turn to the next one. We're looking at this slide here now, minus my notes. Should say innovations and accomplishments. So I also want to take the opportunity, we have a fairly large budget, and we take those budgeted items and we took those dollar amounts and then we expense them out on projects. And I want to give you a progress report on what we've used those public dollars for and where we've been successful. A lot of this is going to be around efficiencies, but also around a key item that you're aware of in the fire service, and that is the reduction in response times. It is not unusual for municipal governments to spend millions and millions of dollars to reduce response times. Largely, typically, that is, hire more firefighters, buy more fire trucks, put more fire stations in, and then we will be able to handle our response times. And that's not unusual for any organization, right? If you have a problem, hire more people. What I'm trying to show you is that we are taking a different approach. Right? We are not asking for those things. We're finding innovative ways to do business. So let me share with you a few of those. On occasion, during the discussion going forward, I'm going to ask you to refer to that map that's next to you. So just have that available. That's the Fire Management Area Response Map. It's a larger map, Mayor. It's about 11 by 17 handout. Thank you. Very good. So on occasion, or in the past, if you look at that map, those red indicators there are fire station locations, and that's actually the number of the fire station. If a fire station crew needed to go to training, they would get on the rig, start it up, leave their fire management area, means leave their neighborhood, go clear across town to the training center, and basically leave that neighborhood vacant while they were at training for several hours. That means we would pretty much just hope our performance measures weren't impacted while we were gone, right? And that hope's not a good method to management. I learned that early on. So we would abandon neighborhoods to take our crews out to training. So within the last, these all happened within the last year, these accomplishments that we're going to talk about. And this is under Chief Burns' direction. We ended up purchasing a system called Target Solutions. It's an online training platform. We figured if you can get an advanced degree at universities, you can do some online training for fire and emergency medical services training. So now the crews stay in their stations and do the training online. In order to get that training online, we needed to have high-speed internet. When I started here, the fire stations did not have high-speed internet, so we could not do online training. I'm telling you this, we were able to get this done. This wasn't our doing. We worked closely with the Bureau of Technology Services during what is a critical phase in their operation of moving out of the Portland building. And I wanted to thank Jeff Baird and his team for helping us get this done. Without their commitment and cross-collaboration with bureaus, we would not have been able to achieve this. Keeping units in their stations helps response times. When a call comes in, they can immediately respond. If they were across town at training and a call had come in, they would not meet the response times. This was a good innovation and I think a good use of the public dollar you gave us last year, so thank you. CrewSense. When I arrived, we would just do your normal thing. You review all of the different operations and where we might have some problems. And one of the problems that we had is how do we staff every day? This is a big organization. It's a 24-hour organization. People are moving in and out. How do we maintain staff? We had one individual working in what we call bureau headquarters to do staffing. We used to, in my discussions with individuals, have 10 individuals doing staffing years ago. Now we have one. And that individual simply could not keep up. So the Bureau asked me for more individuals. I said, no, we can't afford to hire more individuals for Bureau headquarters. Let's figure out some other solution. We ended up purchasing a software product called CrewSense that does this staffing automated, right? The software does it in lieu of individuals. Again, I think a good innovation and an improvement for efficiencies and productivity. You'll see the word AVL often, automatic vehicle location. In the past, we used to send units to a call based on that map that I showed you there, where if a call landed within that geographical area, we sent that fire truck to it, regardless if that fire truck was the closest one or not. Today, however, we send the closest unit by satellite. Through BOIC, the call comes in, it gets analyzed, and then the satellite chooses which unit is closer. It sends that unit regardless of geographic location. That has trimmed response times down dramatically, as you can see the next slide next to it in the key areas of some of these fire management areas where that has had an impact. It is also a gold standard. On opening Station 23, for several years, 7, 8 years now, Station 23 in the Clinton area has been closed. There was no fire station. There was a fire station there, but it simply was shuttered. So by moving some units around, by redeploying our current resources, we were able to open Station 23 at no cost to the city. And it immediately had a dramatic impact on response times. If you looked at the far rectangle off to your right there, it talks about before and then after. I spoke a few minutes ago that municipalities spend millions of dollars in staffing trying to get response times down. We were able to do this at no cost to the city for the Clinton neighborhood, and I think they deserve to have a fire station open in that neighborhood, and they're very excited to have it. So I thought that was a very good efficiency to share with you as well. Also, in order to gain value for whatever dollars that we have, sometimes we have to get very creative in how we work some contracts. An opportunity came to us this year. Actually last year, Multnomah County Public Health was renegotiating the contract for ambulance service. That RFP went out last year. It was recently awarded, and it sounds like American Medical Response will be the new winner of that contract. During those contract negotiations, we asked to be a part of that because we felt there was room for opportunity for the ambulance company. Whoever wins that bid will have an opportunity to make quite a bit of money off that contract, that we felt that they needed to participate in building out the emergency medical services system for the city of Portland. Currently, our crews go out to a call, take information about the patient, write it down on a piece of paper, come back to the station, and enter it into a desktop computer. Let's say it takes 10 minutes or 20 minutes on a big call to fill out a patient care report inside the station. Let's say they run on average 10 calls a day, which is pretty typical for a fire station. That's a couple of hours sitting in front of a desktop computer every day transferring information. We asked the private ambulance company, because they already use a different item, to help us extend what they're using to us, an electronic mobile patient care reporting system. We'll be actually asking for some tablets in our ad package to help support this, but so we can do patient care reporting in the field, right there with the patient, and then finish that while we're en route back to the station, and we can reduce that time in front of the desktop, again, increasing efficiencies on how we do business. We've also asked them to provide us with a quality assurance and quality improvement program, one we don't have today that's automated. We asked them for real-time dashboards so we can see what's going on in the EMS system. Today we don't even know. But most importantly, we asked them to be very open with us about the discussion of reducing low acuity calls. If you can flip to the next slide. Thank you for whoever's doing these slides for me. I can only do two things at once. Thank you, Andrew. We have had a habit of staffing based on workload. So as the more calls come in, I'm under the impression that the population is going to increase significantly in the city of Portland. I would argue then, if this population is going to increase significantly, call volume will increase significantly. And today, we send fire trucks and ambulances on almost every type of call. There are a few calls that we don't. So as long as we continue to staff the way we staff and send the units on the types of calls that we send them on, as the population continues, it will go from this line actual to the unsustainable line. We will get to the point where the current footprint of Portland Fire and Rescue can simply not handle the volume of calls going forward into the future. That means I would be coming to the table at some point and asking you for more firefighters, more fire engines, and more fire stations, unless we start managing the call volume. I'm not here to manage the population, but I am here to manage the call volume. So in discussions with Multnomah County, discussions with other partners, the intent now is how do we reduce that call volume and really focus on what we do, which is emergencies. There is, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, where a fire truck is on the scene with a private ambulance company and it's a low acuity call, it's a slip, trip, or fall, and you probably wonder to yourself, why are so many people here? And our answer in the past is that's just how we do business. That's how we operate. I argue there's a better way. And so we're in discussions about, are we the right unit to go on those low acuity calls? Those individuals are not going to die. They're not going to, it's not a true emergency in the emergency of life and death. It's an emergency to them, but not in life and death. So should we focus on those other calls and look at more efficiencies and more productivity that way?
Commissioner Uday.
Yes, Commissioner.
What's the term you're using? Low QE?
Low acuity.
Acuity.
Can also,
okay.
also be referenced loosely as non-emergency.
Yeah.
Now, how much can be reduced is up to discussion, right? It's discussion between Dr. Jew as the medical director, with the county, with the private ambulance company, with our own staff on what we would be comfortable with, where the risk is involved, on what we should go on and what we shouldn't go on, where the best impacts for this fire service would be. We are your first responders. We've been the first responders in the county for years. We stop the clock first. We're there for every cardiac arrest, every stroke, every gunshot to the head, every vehicle rollover where the patient's been ejected, every hanging, every drowning. The fire service is there, and we use our tools and the number of individuals necessary to get that job done. But we don't need to put that much apparatus on low acuity calls or non-emergency calls. If we don't change, we will be managing the same way we have in the past, and it will become unsustainable. We have to find a new way, and I'm suggesting that we manage the call volume. Next slide. Should be the map. Familiar with this? Little handout that I had. I think I showed you this last year. We might even showed a little bit at the work session. Zero is our hero. Right, the goal I have is to get to 0 fire deaths in the city of Portland. And it's a nice handout. It's neat to show, and it's on our hanger. But I've often been laughed at, a little scoffed at. The chief, there's no way you can get to 0 fire deaths in the city of Portland. This is a big urban city. You just did that. You just printed it on there so you could have something nice to say. Okay, fair. Let me argue the point. If you look at your map, and we laid a heat map over the city of Portland, and we showed where in the where's all our fire occurring, where are our fire deaths occurring, and we laid a heat map over the city of Portland of poverty, or graduation rates, or public health issues. Those heat maps would be generally the same, because fire is a social and economic issue. It is not about smoke detectors, although they help, and we will continue to do it. It's about social economic issues. If I look at the fire station up in Station 27 up in Forest Park, and I looked at the fire station out at 31s closer to Gresham, and I said, are they the same? Do they have the same fire problem? No, they're completely different. Do they have the same public health problems? No, they're completely different. Every neighborhood, every fire management area in the city of Portland is unique, has unique problems that need to be uniquely addressed. So we are going to develop blueprints for success that are aligned with the needs of each neighborhood. Let me argue it this way. St. John's, Station 21, if you can find St. John's on your map. Sorry, Station 22. We take out that puzzle piece. Just lift it out, take that puzzle piece out with me, Station 22, and let's set it right in the middle of rural Oregon. And we're going to call it the City of St. John's. City of St. John's with 16, 17,000 people there. That would have it would have a city hall. It would have a mayor. It would have some commissioners. It would have a transportation bureau. It would have a city budget office. It would probably have a fire chief. It'd have one fire station. It would have a fire chief, and that fire chief would be concerned about the budget. The fire chief would be concerned about public approval. That fire chief would be concerned about getting to 0 fire deaths in that city, and he or she would design a method to keep it to 0. And when I ask people, if we had a small city in rural Oregon and we put all of our resources to it, could we keep the fire deaths down to 0 in that small city? And almost everybody will say, yeah, well, yeah, sure, of course, Chief, you could get to 0 fire deaths in that city if you put all your resources, specifically to what that city needs. You could do that. Well, great. Then if we can do that there, what if I take that puzzle piece back, put it back into the city of Portland, and do that same design pattern 31 times? Could we then get to 0 fire deaths in the city of Portland? And I argue that you could. And so you may think to yourself today, well, this is awkward and different and new and I don't know, but that's what I'm supposed to do. Thank you. I'm supposed to design new methods and new ways of getting the job done because the old way is no longer going to deliver. And I have to figure out a new way to get to 0 fire deaths because we haven't been able to get it in the past. Commissioner?
Chief, could you remind us again what are the top 2 or 3 most preventable fire deaths?
So, in my time here in Portland, what I've been seeing is a consistent discarding of smoking materials has been leading to multiple fires around the city of Portland, combined with other drug or alcohol use. And that's pretty consistent. We have to attack that issue. But it's not just a cigarette disposal issue. It really does lead to the other social economic issues in the environment that we find people living in that may drive them to have behaviors that may lead to other injury. I would frankly argue that you might find fires aligning with where pedestrian deaths are or other activities going on, right? So we're talking about livability here and vibrancy of a city. Where vibrancy is, cities don't burn. Where livability scores are high, it's safer, both for fire and everything else. And so that's what our practicability models are showing. Okay, next slide, because it sounds like I've just been prepped to move along, which is consistently the message I receive. Let's get on to decision packages. Should be 3 bullets that are on your slide. I'm going to start off with the first one, then I'm going to ask my other 2 staff members next to me to address the next 2. The first one is Bureau Equity Manager. Last year I came to the table about this time. I'd just gotten here. I'd been here for about a year and a half, just trying to understand what was going on in the Portland Fire Bureau, turning over the rocks, just really understanding what the job is going to entail. And one of the things that came up was that we were asked to have a 5-year equity plan in Portland Fire long before I got here, and it wasn't completed when I arrived. We also, other bureaus our size had equity managers. So I came to you shortly after I got here during the budget process, and I asked for one. I asked for an equity manager, and it was denied, which is fine. So I went back to the table and thought, well, what can I do over this next year until I get to today to make sure that I'm ready to go and I'm making progress on this issue? We hired Portland State University to do a workplace cultural assessment. Now, this is not your average survey for cultural assessment. I asked Portland State University to not only do the survey, but I want one-on-one interviews. One-on-one interviews with every executive staff member, and it started with me. It started with me, and my direction to them was, I want you interviewing me to make sure that I'm the fire chief that this city needs to lead us through change regarding equity. I'm that transparent with that study, and that's how serious I am about it. I also asked them to put together the 5-year equity plan to help get us started. They've met with me. I've explained the coggle in the strategic plan, so they understand how it works. They are to give me a 5-year equity plan that is designed the same way that I can plug directly into my component of the strategic plan, which I am personally responsible to get done in my performance reviews.
Chief, could I ask you a question? And
Yes,
first
sir.
of all, let me say I applaud that, and I appreciate your strategic approach to equity as well. So one of the open questions centers around the relationship between Bureau-led equity strategies and the Office of Equity and Human Rights, which is an citywide infrastructure-wide program. Have you given any thought to how those two things work in concert, or do they work separately? What's your current viewpoint?
That's a great question, Mayor. So we have a very robust equity committee. I go to every one of those equity committees personally. Also, Jeff Selby goes to every one of those equity committee members, and he is from the Office of Equity and Human Rights. And I think Jeff is actually in the room today. Thank you, Jeff, for attending today. So we are linked very closely with them. Jeff and I speak regularly. We were in conversation about this request before I came here today. So I am confident that we are linked in kind with Kofi and his work team.
Very good. And Jeff, just a heads up, when we spend a little more time together with the Office of Equity and Human Rights, I'm going to ask the same question, just the reverse of it. Commissioner Fritz.
Chief, we did have this discussion last year, and I remember saying that I believe equity is the most important thing and it should be done with existing resources. And I really appreciate that in this City Budget Office's analysis, they say that you've found the existing resources for ongoing. I don't understand why you're asking for this as an extra. This is probably the most important thing that the Bureau has to do in terms of figuring out who is most impacted by fire deaths and by medical issues and such. So why are you asking for extra money to do something that is such a core function?
Thank you, Commissioner. It's an excellent question. So, long gone, I believe, at least in my bureau, and I would argue that this is familiar to most directors. Long gone are the days when I can look at a program within the bureau, simply eliminate it, and the funds then realized from that elimination can then fund something else. I've spent the last year combing through contracts, line item budget items where I can find $1,000 here. If I rewrite this contract, I can save $2,500 here. I mean, I've been looking under couch cushions for the entire year to come up with the nickels to find the dollar for ongoing funds. There are a couple of items that I am actually reliant on you here today that will help me fund this. One of them, this is just an example. Currently today, in fire prevention, the fire prevention inspectors, first of all, are not getting all of the inspections that need to get done in a year done, primarily because we lack an efficient model to get it done. They go around using paper to collect the data, and then this paper takes this long circuit of unbelievability until it finally gets to the point where we are done with the inspection. If, during the innovation fund, an innovation request I have on the table, if we are able to use a mobile record-keeping system that is much more efficient, it is our understanding that we can get many, many more inspections done that weren't getting done. Those fees from those inspections can then, that dollar amount can then be used to help ongoing, for long-term, offset the cost of this employee. So I'm working, like I said, many different contract areas and many different adjustments to try to find the bulk of the money together so I can get this ongoing. Some of this won't actually take place until a little bit later in this year.
So thank you for that answer. You told us that you were able to open a new fire station or reopen a fire station.
Yes.
The community healthcare position has been funded with internal resources, and you have found internal resources to fund this ongoing. I appreciate all those things. I just don't understand why there's a one-time request if you found the money for it ongoing, and if you share the council's commitment to this as a really important position.
I can only tell you with Station 23, we did it at no cost to the city. This is moving individuals around. The current chat program was a pilot study that we signed with the local 43. I almost used the wrong local number. Local 43, these are individuals that are in the sworn ranks. This equity manager is a non-sworn position. So I understand you've been very clear with me, Commissioner. You have more than once you've explained this to me. So I do understand. I obviously can't convince you enough that I'm working very hard to get this done, but I want you to know that I am, and my heart is in the right place. I'm now going to turn this next item over to...
Chief, I have one question about Portland State University study. Would you recommend that to other large bureaus to go through the same? I'm assuming it was for free.
It is not for free. No, it was rather expensive. No disrespect to Portland State.
I have no conflict. I have a trustee at Portland State. So.
You know, it's money well spent. It is money well spent. I wanted an academic organization to get this completed. I need this done correctly and professionally. They've been nothing but I'll reserve my recommendation until we get the final product delivered. Okay?
Thank you.
The next item on here is the self-contained breathing apparatus. I've asked Deputy Chief Sarah Boone to be present. Chief Boone, you may recognize, she actually this weekend has been very busy commanding the derailment, the train derailment. She was in command of that operation, and she did an awesome job. So I've asked her to get some sleep and be here this morning and be prepared to talk about self-contained breathing apparatus. Chief?
Good morning, Mayor Wheeler.
Good morning.
Sorry, I'm a little nervous here. Commissioner Fritz, Commissioner Udaly, Commissioner Fish, and Commissioner Saltzman. As the chief said, my name is Sarah Boone. I'm the Deputy Chief of Logistics for Portland Fire and Rescue. Today I'm going to talk about one-time funding that we're requesting to replace our entire inventory. And just before I go into the speech, we're just going to give you a little overview of visuals so you can understand some of the components, because this is a real technical piece of equipment for us. This is called the self-contained breathing apparatus. It's self-contained, specifically made for interior structural firefighting. We have no other outside source of air. So when firefighters go into a structure, the only amount of breathable air that they have is contained in this bottle. Portland Fire, all our SCBA cylinders that firefighters wear contain, give them about 45 minutes of air. The cylinders are certified by NIOSH, and how they test these cylinders, they use the regular breathing rate of everyday industrial workers, miners, and so the consumption rate is about 40 liters per minute. The National Fire Protection Standards that we abide by through NFPA realize that firefighters work at a higher rate of breathing, and so they test at 100 liters per minute. So if you look at our SCBA bottle, it's compressed to 4,500 PSI. It's about 45 minutes tested to NIOSH standards at 40 liters, but we know that we breathe at times over 100 liters per minute. So we can breathe down this air in less than 22 minutes. So this is really critical for us. There's no other air supply that comes in. Oh, thank you. This is a high pressure system, pressurized to 4,500 PSI. We have a first stage regulator that's on the side that regulates the cylinder pressure down to 80 PSI throughout the whole system. And then we have a second stage regulator that interfaces with the face mask that drops that pressure down to just before atmospheric. It's considered an open system because that regulator interfaces with the face mask. Firefighters inhale the air from the cylinder bottle, and then they exhale it out to atmosphere. So it doesn't close back into a circuit. So that's why we call it the open circuit self-contained breathing apparatus. Thank you, Chief. So as I stated earlier, this is one of the most important items of personal protective equipment used by firefighters and rescue personnel. And I'm going to use the acronym SCBA, because that stands for self-contained breathing apparatus. The SCBA allows firefighters to enter into hazardous environments that are immediately dangerous to health and life to perform emergency operations. In essence, this is their lifeline. Our respiratory protection is more vital today than at any other time in the past. Over the last 50 years, laminates, synthetics, foams, and plastics have replaced wood furnishings and natural materials. It is the smoke that incapacitates and kills more people than the flame. The combination of toxic chemicals, superheated gases, and carcinogenic smoke particulates from modern furnishings and modern building materials makes it essential that firefighters have the highest level of dependable respiratory protection equipment that meets current NFPA standards. It is our policy that all emergency operations personnel are required to perform a visual inspection and a functional check of their assigned SCBA in the morning on their duty shift and after each use. It's no different if you were going to jump out of or parachute out of an airplane. You would want to know that your equipment is going to function before you jump. So that is why we require them to do these daily checks, visually inspect their equipment, and also make sure that it functions. Yet in spite of having these safety practices and regulatory policies in place, many of our firefighters are consistently experiencing SCBA breakdowns and malfunctions in the field. Over the last 3 years, there have been several incidents of firefighters that have experienced a no-air situation inside working structure fires, exposing them to hazardous atmospheres and toxic contaminants. And when I talk about a no-air situation, it means that somewhere, some component on that SCBA has failed.
Could I ask what the ask is? How much is the package?
It's $3 million.
So here's a question I have for you. This is a life or death apparatus, as you just described it. They've been failing for 3 years, as you just described it. And so now into a cut budget process, you are adding a $3 million life and safety ask. Why didn't you plan for this? Why is there no reserve or no long-term capital replacement plan for equipment without which you can't actually survive your job?
Chief, I'll handle that for you.
Okay.
Unless you'd like to. So, Mayor, it's an excellent question, and I think Tom Reinhardt, I think we talked about this and you led off. I was here on the 15th when you talked about the need to do better planning and have capital replacement funding. And this is my exact question I had of our own budget office when we started talking about how can I go forward and ask the mayor and the commission for $3 million when they're not aware it's coming during a budget cycle like this. So we're well aware of our responsibility to do it a different way. Any type of replacement. And I understand that there was a sudden need, that there were some failures here, and those are, I have a zero tolerance for failures of critical equipment. We all do. But I'm well aware of the fact that we should have capital replacement funding for critical infrastructure, and that this is the inappropriate way to come before a committee and surprise you with a $3 million request. I'm very aware of that. It does not negate the fact that we have to ask. But I've had this conversation with the budget office as well. I was very upfront with them when we discovered that we needed it. So your concern weighs heavy on me, I understand.
Is it all right if I ask
Please.
a follow-up real quick? Of course. Yeah, so I'm just curious about replacing all of them. I mean, usually when you have equipment failures, some of the equipment fails, and then you do rigorous testing and make sure that that you have among your equipment fleet, you have a number of good units. But I'm wondering about the decision to replace every unit. That seems very extreme.
Thank you for the question. We're no different than any other fire department across the U.S. So when it comes to respiratory protection, we know that it's the most critical piece of equipment. We also know that it's highly expensive to maintain. It's a mechanical piece of equipment that parts break down, there's wear and tear, we're hard on the equipment, it gets damaged. We fund an in-house SCBA technician because we believe it's so important when a pack goes down, gets damaged, malfunctions, that we can, send it into our shop, have it replaced. We also have spare packs that, in order to keep a company in service, we can deliver out to the companies. This is not just one piece of equipment, it is an entire system. With that being said, not every fire department and not every city is going to have the budget to constantly replace their equipment every 5 years, which is the cycle of NFPA and the standards, just because things are changing so much. So what we do is we find money within our budget to upgrade to meet those standards. Our respiratory equipment worked. Aside from routine maintenance, what makes this ask different than any other time is a manufacturer has implemented, redesigned a second stage regulator. That's what interfaces with our face piece. We didn't have a choice. They redesigned it for manufacturability in 2009, and within 8 years of that change, they're requiring everybody to overhaul to that new specific style. It is that new style of second stage regulators that we have had to phase into our equipment that has been failing. 39 out of the 90 second stage regulators that we've put into service have failed. So what that does is it doesn't allow firefighters to activate airflow. This isn't something that we expected. It wasn't anything that the manufacturer inspected. We're continuing to work with them on the problem. But at the same time, we know that we have to overhaul our entire inventory and put these new style regulators into service. And we can't afford to do that because we have already identified that it is an issue and that they are failing.
Commissioner Fish.
So, Chief, you've presented a compelling health and safety issue for us to consider. We can spend our time here talking about the process questions, but I think we also need to spend a little time identifying what the potential solutions are. At page 10 of the CBO analysis, it lays out potentially 4 different ways that this could be funded. You've applied for a federal grant. There may be some additional balance on the 1998 GEO bond. There may or may not be funds in an apparatus reserve balance. There may be monies available in current year underspending. Mayor, I want to add a 5th option, and this could trigger some strong feelings on our side, but I also would like to have Andrew Scott and his team assess whether under our current rules there is any way that this ask could qualify and compete for our capital set-aside money. Now, we have set up criteria, and they are generally programs that we fund that have a health and safety component. Streets that are in need of urgent repair, parks facilities that have failed equipment, roofs, and other things. It seems to me, while it maybe doesn't, it may be apples and oranges. I'm trying to figure out how close the analogy is, but I would like the option of the budget office advising us as to whether this could compete for our capital set aside. And for those wondering what that is, that's the 50% of the money under a rule adopted by proposed by Commissioner Fritz, of our unallocated money that is set aside at budget time for major maintenance. If this does qualify, I'd like to know whether it does and have that option when we consider how to spend that money.
I'll close on this item. Let me make a commitment to you. I've been here for a year and a half. I've been turning over rocks since I've been here. It's a very good bureau, very strong. They fight fire very well. They do an excellent job. There are areas that need to be improved. I've shared a few of those today. There are a couple of items that we have that should be, that we need capital improvement funds in place, not simply coming to ask you for a bulk of money, and that includes large-scale infrastructure. You know, turnouts, trucks, big equipment purchases. So you have my commitment to look through those items and square those up. And Jessica, you and I know what those are, right? So this is not new news to us. We'll be going through that, those budget items and cleaning that up. Okay?
Thanks, Chief.
You're welcome. The next item I have.
Commissioner Udaly.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Will the new apparatus have greater capacity?
Yeah, sorry, that's.
Because I began having a little bit of a panic attack, as you described, how quickly people are breathing and using up that oxygen.
Right, so our SCBAs are certified to 2007 NFPA standards. In 2013, the manufacturer that makes our specific model of SCBA reinvested and re-engineered respiratory equipment to meet the 2013 standards. So they completely redesigned a new generation of breathing apparatus. This is also why this is so important for us today, is we can no longer update and integrate parts, is because the new generation uses enhanced technology and ours is not compatible.
Yeah, and I hope that came across. I mean, I think the very short answer is this equipment is obsolete and we can't continue to upgrade it. So, thank you.
And one of the questions was about the general obligation bond, and the city budget obviously suggests that you might be able to use that money. How much is left in that?
I'll have business operations lead Jay Guo assist us with that question.
My name is Jay Guo, Senior Business Operation Manager for Portland Fire and Rescue. So to answer your question, we have about $7 million in the apparatus replacement reserve. Those are kind of, it's not the GO bond money. Is during the 5-year GO bond period, we set aside the ongoing apparatus replacement money into a reserve account. So that's what right now there's, the balance is about $7 million.
Next up, I'm asking Division Chief Ken Burns to handle the next item, which is the Community Health Manager.
Mayor, Commissioner, community advisors, I appreciate your time in the budget office also. So I'm Ken Burns, I'm the Division Chief of Medical Services and Training. And today I want to just have a conversation about a community management, community healthcare manager position, formerly known as the CHAT. This position currently exists. We're actually taking a position from our traveling pool to accomplish these three things I'm going to share with you today. The downside of taking someone from the traveler pool, if you will, is it increases overtime, because the intent of the traveler pool is to offset overtime, so we can cover that at the end. So this position has three areas of responsibility. They do community outreach, they work on the high utilizers of the 911 system, and community education. I want to talk first about the high utilizer program that's been around for about 18 months now. Tremaine Clayton is actually with us today. He is the person responsible for the high utilizer program at this time. He's done an outstanding job. I'm just going to share a couple of figures with you. He usually works with 20 high utilizers at one time. That's kind of his client capacity. And to give you kind of an idea of his success, 20 individuals over, say, a 3-month period, the last quarter of 2017, would have called 911 or did actually call 911 roughly 200 times. 20 individuals, 200 times. With Tremaine's intervention, those same 20 individuals called 911 104 times. Still a lot of work to be done, but a reduction of about 55% for those 20 individuals that Tremaine's been working with. Now, how does he do it? He goes and finds them. He gets referrals from our engine company. He partners with Multnomah County. He gets assistance from our medical director. We're trying to find a better way, going upstream. So he's post-911 reach out to try to find out what's a better way to give them their services. He's got them in, drug addiction programs. He's got them some housing, which is very important. So he's part of a network. He's not out there by himself, but he's using the high utilizer, 911 utilizer for us. There's about 400 if you look at a statistic that the county uses, which is 10 times in 6 months. Our numbers that we look at is 3 911 calls in 1 month. You stay in that system. Now, some utilizers literally have called 911 15, 20 times in a month. So he's really looking at the highest end of the 911 utilizers. So Tremaine's doing an outstanding job with that program. It's been in existence for about 1.5 years. He also is involved in the community outreach. So the homeless population in Portland, we all know, is growing. They have specific needs. They call 911 often, and it becomes a service delivery issue. Again, they need a different set of services, not 911. They need housing, they need shelter, they need food, they need social services. So Tremaine has had active conversations with Portland Street Medicine. We just had a great conversation with the Joint Office of Homelessness, Mark's and his team. We've had conversations with Central City Concerns, looking at how we can become a part of a team to really focus on the homeless initiatives that the City of Portland would like us to engage in. And then the third area of the community education, Tremaine's been working with OHSU nursing program. They're out right now in a class that was designed in part with our input to go out in the communities and look at clinic status, food status, look at the entire city of Portland, neighborhood by neighborhood, to find out what are the healthcare disparities, what are the needs out there. And then Tremaine will couple with them to promote some health education programs. If we find a community area or a high facility that calls us a lot, and they have, we run our statistics, and there's a lot of calls regarding diabetes or stroke. Tremaine is working on programs of education. So his third piece is actually, again, educating pre-911 and post-911 cardiac concerns, diabetic stroke prevention. So the position is the community healthcare manager. They will focus on the 3 areas: the community outreach with the homeless initiatives, the high utilizer 911 system, and the community education portion. That is existing today, and the reason we're here again to discuss this as a funded position. The chief has been gracious in funding this position with a traveler firefighter who would normally be offsetting overtime. And we're really trying to watch our overtime under the direction of our commissioner. I think he's spot on. We are trying to do more with less. We're trying to do more with the same amount of individuals. And this is a workaround to get a great project, great services to the community. And we would appreciate the funding to progress even further. There's so much more that we can do going upstream of the 911 call.
Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Chief.
Why does it take a sworn firefighter to do this position? I think it's a great, obviously there are things that you said that it does, but we have park rangers doing outreach to people who need services. Why does it take a firefighter?
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me the credibility that the public has with the firefighters. So Tremaine brings a unique set of skills, not only as a paramedic, but as his history of being a firefighter, but he actually can gain trust, openness, and clear communication. So him being part of a team, he's been part of, someone who calls 911 a lot, for example, could get serviced by Multnomah County's TC 911, social workers, very talented group. Some of the 20 that I just spoke to you about had already been engaged in the TC 911 program, and Tremaine came in and was able to, make a difference and I think it's because of his demeanor, his how he represents the city and the fire department. And actually, I think the biggest is the idea that credibility and that we're here to help them. It can't be matched by any other group out there.
And I can take a little bit opportunity to do this too. I know we're running a little short on time. So if a 911 call comes in today, it goes through BOIC, and it ends up really down one path: a fire engine and a private ambulance unit. So if you can imagine calls that that are made through that fall into different buckets, a firefighter, paramedic with a defibrillator, with the ultimate in solution of taking that individual to a hospital, to an emergency room via a private ambulance, isn't always the solution. But that's the solution that we have available to us as the city of Portland. There actually is a broad spectrum across the United States of other options. Some individual in the future, and this is happening in other states, in the future, you might call 911 and you get directly to access your healthcare provider and through your insurance, and a private avenue to get to your next appointment. And you don't interact with an engine company and an ambulance. There's a whole group of people that sit in the middle that don't need a fire truck with a defibrillator, that hold a whole different type of deployment. We have to start thinking about these direct opportunities of changing the way those models look. There'll always be fires, unfortunately. There are always going to be those cardiac arrests and traffic accidents and derailments, unfortunately. But there's a whole moderate level of individuals in there that don't need that type of response, but that's what we're using and funding to run on them. So I'm trying to shift, not in a big way, just take a step forward, prove the concept, move forward, and then come back and talk more. And it may be, Commissioner, that in the future, who knows where it will lead? Who knows who knows what the right person is? I know the intent here is to do outreach with homeless and provide pre-hospital care early. We're actually looking at some other nonprofit groups that actually can take physicians out into the field with us and do some care and treat and release in the field. And in encampments that aren't brick and mortar, where the van goes around to the brick and mortar building, they're not getting out to these other locations that we think we can. And in talking with Mark Jones, there's a lot of different outreach out there. We do not want to duplicate these services. We're looking for the niche that's not getting filled, because if that niche isn't getting filled, they're calling 911 and we're going with the fire truck, which is not right. I've got to figure out a way to handle it. That's all this is here. We're looking at innovative opportunities to fill that gap and to maybe change the way we do business. And Tremaine has been making some progress there. So that's what this really is about. And thank you, Chief, for giving that note. If there's no more questions on that, the next person I wanted to, I'm sorry?
Rob has a question.
Gotcha.
I actually have two related questions. The first is, my understanding is that there were 96 times we estimate that 911 was not called as a result of the work of this officer. And so the question is, do you have a sense of how much was the city saved in terms of the resources that were not sent out, deployed in response, and also what effect that had on your call time response in general? Like, if you were making more calls, then it's possible that then that reduced your call time by not making those calls as a result of the community officer of their work. And then the second question is more related to the general topic that Chief Myers has been talking about, which is sort of being more smart and strategic about how the city deploys its research. And this has been a topic that we have been discussing in this chamber for years now, and I applaud your efforts in this direction, and I recognize the importance of this position. My reading of the CBO's analysis is that they definitely think that this should continue. They're just not suggesting that it should be funded in the way that has been requested. Anyway, I just wonder about the sort of the liability piece associated with it, which is something, has the fire department been working with the city attorney in terms of what the city can respond with in these lower acuity cases that you're trying to manage, and I think that that's a good idea. But I worry about the exposure that it maybe puts the city, exposes the city to in terms of legal liability. If we stop sending engines, if we stop sending people with defibrillators, what the potential costs are in terms of legal exposure. So I'd be very curious to hear about that. Thanks.
Let me go ahead and take the first part, the financial piece. Each transporter is roughly $1,000. Each ER is roughly $2,000. So let's say that's $3,000 and round up to 100. $300,000 the system has saved in a 3-month period because of those 100 transports. The Fire Bureau, at this point, we're looking with conversations with HealthShare. How do we get in on some of that cost savings? That's very much a high priority for us. We are saving the system. We are getting a better healthcare delivery system for the individual. Instead of going to the hospital for 2 hours and then calling us again and going to the hospital for 2 hours, we're saving wear and tear on our apparatus. Those individual fire engines and trucks are available for emergency response because they're not going on that redundant call. With regards to the liability, we work in conjunction with Multnomah County. We are currently undergoing a very deep dive into our acuity program and how we triage calls. And so it's great to have our Dr. Jews, our medical director. We are currently piloting a reduction in calls to a certain type code based on medical triage evidence. And that's where I'll turn it over to our medical director.
Good morning. My name's John Jew. I'm the EMS Medical Director for Multnomah County. I've been in that position since 1995 and lasted through about 6 to 7 fire chiefs as well. I'm here to answer that question directly. We have in Multnomah County, the TC 911 program has been in operation for 3 years. Every individual that actually goes through the program and receives a care plan has to be approved by myself, as well as the county health officer, as well as the county attorney. In all cases, I actually give the final medical sign-off. In all cases, safety is the paramount to the care plan. In other words, if there's any doubt, they get transported or they get an alternate destination. When I actually look through the care plan, I look through all the hospital records and see all the underlying conditions. And if there's no admissions or no other safety issues, medical safety issues I can identify, it gets a sign off by me. So the quick answer to your question is, of any of the patients that I actually see, I devote about 4 to 6 hours per care plan going through the records, and it is approved by my boss, the county health officer, as well as the county attorney. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but I think there's a built-in assumption there, which is that these people who are requiring the service, they're known to you, right? I mean, so it's, if you were to receive a 911 call, you wouldn't be able to make the assessment that it was a low acuity case if it wasn't someone who had already been through the process with the previous call, because you wouldn't have access to all that other data, right?
I see what you're trying to say. The answer is yes. If the patient can be identified by either one or two methods, one of them is the address or the phone number, or the physical, I have Joe, and this is Joe, this is what he or she is. I can tell you that we will respond in a 911 setting if we don't know the patient as well.
Yeah, I think that may be something that may not be obvious to everyone, which is that the great majority of requests for service come from people who have previously requested service.
Just a clarification point, there was 2 different nexus going on. Tremaine is working on high utilizers. Those 100 calls we didn't go on, there was no 911 call. He got them alternative methods to meet their needs. And then there's the triage question about how we would respond in the future as 911's called and initiating those questions and units are dispatched. So two separate ways of delivering a different service.
Quick Mara time check.
7 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. Bobby, you've been waiting patiently to talk. We've got a couple minutes, and then I'll try to wrap it up at the end. So from our community, or Budget Advisory Committee, we've asked Bob and Regan to attend. Thank you, Bobby. Put this over to you.
Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, City Auditor, Advisors. I'm Bobby Regan, a member of the Portland Fire Bureau's Budget Advisory Committee for the past 4 years, so it's an honor to be here again. As I prepped for today, I looked back on my testimony from previous years, and it feels a little like Groundhog's Day. For each of the past 4 years, the mayor has requested significant budget cut recommendations from each bureau. And while the Fire Bureau complied, our Budget Advisory Committee could not. We simply couldn't sign off on staff's reluctantly proposed recommendation to close stations or to reduce its fleet of rapid response vehicles. We are grateful that the city's budget office agrees that such cuts would be devastating to the Bureau and to our Portland residents. As Portland's population continues to grow, as density increases, as downtown buildings are rebuilt to higher elevations, as traffic congestion worsens, as the number of forest fires increases, and as our homeless situation continues, Portland's response time in emergencies increased last year. The national goal is for a response time of 5 minutes and 20 seconds or less. Our response time in Portland is now 7 minutes and 39 seconds. That's what we as community members pay attention to, because those 2 minutes could be the difference between life and death. So at a minimum, we ask that you accept the City Budget Office recommendation and maintain all stations and the Bureau's rapid response capacity. In addition, our report to the Council indicated some areas for possible investment, which we've been talking about today. While our committee is in strong agreement with all, I will call out 2 today and ask you to dig deep. First, and perhaps most critically, is the one-time ad. Last year, you included one-time funds to provide a second set of turnouts for each firefighter. That was in keeping with Chief Meyer's goal of reducing cancer in our ranks, and we are grateful for that investment. This year, we're asking for a much larger and perhaps more critical one-time allocation to replace outdated self-contained breathing apparatus for our firefighters. The Bureau's last major purchase was 16 years ago. We're experiencing a 10 to 30% failure rate today, putting firefighters at risk. The city's budget office considers this a, quote, critical request, unquote. We do too. We ask you to consider this investment now before we experience a fully avoidable tragedy. Second, we ask you to fund on an ongoing basis both a community health care position, which we believe could help reduce response times, and an equity manager. I'll focus specifically on the equity position since the Budget Office recommended funding this position with one-time funds next year. Among other things, this position, this equity manager, could help ensure that the Bureau's workforce better resembles Portland's population. Portland Fire should include more female firefighters and a more diverse workforce generally. We believe that diversity would enable a more culturally responsive experience for Portland residents. While we greatly appreciate the Budget Office recommendation to fund this position for 1 year, we believe that if we as a city are serious about our equity goals, this position should be funded on an ongoing basis with general fund dollars. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you for the work you do every day.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you for your service as well. I like to remind people that the advisory positions don't pay particularly well. And so we're lucky to have people of your caliber and our community budget advisors participating in this process. Yeah. Commissioner Fish.
Chief, thanks for, as always, a superb presentation. We have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we just get some questions in. The city is making progress in streamlining the permitting process. I can tell you, since I've been spending a lot of time out in the community the last 6 months, it is still an area where we get an earful. And there's a lot of things we can do about it. Commissioner Daly is going to put a small business liaison at the Bureau of Development Services. We're all learning about the cannabis industry and about technology and how we can be more responsive to the technology that they're bringing on board. An issue that I've heard from time to time has to do with consistency of feedback. And it goes like this. A small business person or someone is doing a reconstruction or a build out, and toward the end, a fire marshal comes and says, okay, you got to do this, this, and this, and you got to put your sprinklers over here. And then a couple weeks later, another person who's a fire marshal shows and says, you know, actually you got to move it 2 feet this way and move that. Now, I'm not singling out the Fire Bureau. The stories we get about consistency go across the board. I actually think we've made a lot of progress. But the question I want to put to you is, how can we collectively get to a place where there's more consistency in terms of what we're telling our customers?
So I'll ask Nate Takara, who is the fire marshal, to take a seat, and he might be able to help answer this question. I can tell you this, I have experience in this, and there are 2 areas where I think we can improve from actual permitting, fire permitting type standpoint. One is the development services center type approach, where it's a one-stop shop. I'm a developer, I have some plans that need reviewed. I don't have to go all over town trying to find out who's going to stamp what and when. And then good performance measures on how fast we turn those permits, those plans over, and so they can do business. And that's going to be important. It's important now as things grow. It's going to be important to keep business business running. The issue with consistency, and I've got story after story, and from a prior place where I was the chief, where a person might own a property on one side of the street and own a property on the other side of the street, and they had 2 different inspectors, right? And this side of the street, they said, hey, you can't have this unit close to this wall, and the other one said, yeah, it's no problem, don't worry about it, which is right. So this is a consistent problem. But for us specifically, I'm going to ask Chief Takara, who is the fire marshal for the city of Portland, to make comment. Chief, your button there.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Nate Takar. I'm the Fire Marshal. To answer your question, I think the key is communication from the early onset, from the inspectors, relating to each inspector, as well as working collaboratively with the Bureau of Development Services. But a lot of times when we have problems, it's lack of communication, whether it's permit related or during the inspection phases. So I guess getting back to it, it's early onset with communication from when the project is starting, and I think we're doing a better job working with the Bureau of Development Services to minimize those problems.
Is it just, I'm sorry for the ignorance of this question, but is it not practical on some projects to have the same inspector throughout the process so you get the consistency of having one person reviewing them rather than multiple people?
So yes and no, but so it depends on the type of projects. Here in Portland, we have some complex projects, so we do have specialists. We have some folks that just specialize in just alarms or sprinklers, et cetera, or plan review. And the problem lies in a lot of times when an inspector goes there specifically just to look at the sprinkler systems and the feedback to give back, not necessarily for the alarms. And so when the alarm inspector goes back, there's separate issues that the inspectors have different expertise in. So it depends, again, on the complexity of the projects.
Well, Chief, I like what you said. We're committed across all the bureaus to streamlining and improving the customer experience. I get feedback about all the bureaus, so I'm not singling out fire. Obviously, you can't cut corners around life safety issues, so these are very important. But I do think that early communication and consistency is what people have a right to expect, and I think that's something we can all do better.
And you have my commitment to Nate and have a conversation about how we can do that, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz. Commissioner Udaly.
Well, thank you, Chief, and everyone that came today. I always enjoy hearing about your process. I appreciate you bringing harm reduction principles to our Fire Bureau. I'm especially appreciative of the managing long-term call volume and costs in combination with community healthcare position. The Fire Bureau is beloved, and honestly, I think the only complaint that I've heard about from constituents is why do they bring big rigs to every call? And I don't have a good answer, and I think I understand it a little bit better today. So I'm looking forward to that continuing to be addressed.
Very good. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Danichka?
Thank you, and thank you for linking your budget presentation to your strategic plan. We talk about often how some of the bureaus are not presenting strategic plans, and it's very hard for us to make informed observations. So my question is, what has been the impact on homelessness growth on the fire department? Because I didn't hear that quite from you guys.
So in reflection to the actual call volume increase? Okay, can you help me with that? And so in the meantime,
I'm sorry, just one more thing. On my way here this morning, I saw a homeless person on a building in the city having a big fire to warm up their hands. So obviously, there must be an impact.
So, yeah, there is an impact, and the impact. So I'm going to start. We can talk statistics, and we may have to get that number back to you. And that Ken will talk and see if we can find that number. In the meantime, I just want to talk about emotional impacts to firefighters. So it's an interesting line of business. We buy a fire truck. We put every possible kind of tool we can think of on it, from medical to cutters to everything you can think of. We hire an individual, and I've actually asked the Bureau to help me with this. We hire a human being, a young man or woman, and then we put them in a uniform, and then I certify them in every possible thing I can certify them in and give them all kinds of different things to wear on the next call. They may put on a hazmat suit. They may have just their Class B uniform on with their medical equipment. They may have a high-angle rescue uniform with all kinds of gear on. They may have a confined space equipment, hazardous materials uniforms. They carry all this stuff. That's why those rigs are so big. There's so much stuff on them. They do everything you call. Whatever you call for, I will send a firefighter to outside of a crime. And usually we're there on those. So when we've always dealt with individuals in need. And sometimes, growing up as a firefighter, some of the greatest impacts I can look back are when the community calls. And remember, these are brick and mortar fire stations. These are the only brick and mortar public health building in neighborhoods everywhere across the city. And sometimes when people call, I can remember some of the biggest impacts I had were simply holding someone's hand as their loved one was dying. That there's somebody in the city that plays that role. And so when it comes down to working with the homeless, these are 24-year-old paramedics that have just entered the adulthood of their life. Some of them are coming to us really young, have never seen a dead person before. And we're asking them to interact with homeless on very complex issues, of housing issues, of social economic issues, at times mental health issues. So we teach them as much as we can about behavioral health, but it boils down to the human being helping a human being. And in our case, our neighbor, we are neighbors, we are a firehouse, a neighbor helping neighbor. And in some neighborhoods, the bulk of the work that our firefighters do is humanitarian work. And it's no different than the humanitarian work you see around the world, which boils down to one human being helping another human being. And this is the city outreach resource that we have in a city, is your fire department. The impacts are individual. It's on each and every fire department, a firefighter, and it's unique on how they handle it. And we work tirelessly as an executive staff to make sure these firefighters have everything they need so they don't become disenfranchised with their work. Because it's 24 hours a day. Every day they're there for the 30 years they're going to be with us. I've got to maintain their morale, maintain their hope that things will get better, that they can make a positive impact on the community. So the impacts are more than just workload and call volume. I can manage that. I will work on that. But this is a social economic issue that every one of us here are challenged with and are working on. And it does reflect on our employees, whether it's individuals at parks that work on with these employees, it's us, right? It's individuals that are out there doing graffiti abatement, and everybody. So the impacts are broad, from behavioral and social impacts on our firefighters to the actual call volume itself. And if we don't have those numbers, we will make sure we get them to the commission and the committee.
I would just offer some quick math of the high utilizers, the 20 that Tremaine is working with. There's 2 to 3 that are homeless. So in the high utilizer realm, you could easily use, the 10%. I don't think it's the 10% of our entire volume. But remember, the homeless population are in a greater need. They don't have the warmth, the shelter, and the food, so they do call 911 often. For us, it's a moving address. So it's, the homeless camp might be in one place one week and somewhere else the next week. So to track them as homeless, it depends on multiple addresses being given. So we are working on a more robust data and collaboration to really get our hands around the impact of our services.
Very good. Thank you. Excellent presentation. Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
2-minute break.
Next up is the Portland Police Bureau. We're about 10 minutes over. My colleagues have asked for a 2-minute break. We'll take a 2-minute break. We are in recess. have Chief Outlaw here. We have 1 hour and 15 minutes for your presentation. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Charging rent for this.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find my mouse.
You're going to get an easement. I'm giving you an easement for this portion of my vote.
Don't listen to Nick, or it's never going to work.
No, it's okay. It's an easement. I'm just grateful if I have a seat at the table. I'm just happy to be here.
I'm sorry. My documents here.
I got the clicker. I'm just trying to find the mouse. Yep.
Is it working?
Yep, I'm just waiting for the go-ahead and when I can find the mouse. And I can hit play.
Is Commissioner Fisher coming?
I don't know what happened to him.
Why don't we start without him?
All right, well, good morning. Before we get started with the slide presentation, I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to sit in front of you, Mr. Mayor, the commissioners, Community Budget Advisory Council, Office of Equity and Human Rights, OMF, Madam Auditor. Obviously, we presented several packages for consideration for this upcoming budget cycle, but what we want to focus on today really is the big ask that's been on everybody's mind. And obviously, we're available to answer any questions that anyone has specifically about the packages. But our big ask this year is about staffing. And I want to start by painting a picture. We have the ability and the opportunity to do something great here in this community. But it's important that in order to do that, we give the officers the resources. And when I say resources, I mean time, money, people, but specifically time. The resources that they need in order to get it done. And one of the challenges that we're facing is that we don't have all of the resources that we need in order to enable and empower officers to do what we're asking them to do. And that is to get out and be community policing officers. That means get out of their cars, say hello to merchants, residents, get to know people, and smile. But we're finding that we're challenged by doing that because they're chasing the radio, going from call to call to call, meaning that they don't have enough discretionary time built into their work schedule to be able to do that. That's not only impacted by the lack of officers that we're having right now, but it's also impacted by the increase in calls for service that we're getting, and we're getting an increase in reported crimes, all as a result of the increase in the population over the years. So I'd like to start off with the first slide, and this will all tie in towards the end, but the first slide, I'm just gonna play a snippet of a call that we received back in November at 6:39 in the morning. It's all right.
Is the volume up?
Yes,
That's about the extent of my technical knowledge.
Have you tried turning it off now?
Well, in the event that we can't get the volume to work, this is a call again that we received back in November, on November 17th, 6:39 in the morning. And a gentleman called dispatch to report that he had been a victim of a carjacking.
Well, please don't play it. If this is an actual tape of a person.
Yeah.
This is an actual tape of a person calling. Please don't play it.
Okay, we won't play it. We redacted a lot of the information, but we won't play it. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably the worst day of the gentleman's life, and I don't think we should be playing this.
Okay. So, before I talk about this slide, again, the nature of that call was the victim calling dispatch. The call lasted just long enough to get information about the incident itself. The reporting party was very calm and was a very, very good witness and provided details that they had been maced in the face with something. They were near a 7-Eleven and they were waiting for police to respond. That's what would have been played in the call. This next slide pretty much talks about how what we're asking is not only in alignment with my goals for the organization, but it's in alignment with the mayor's priority. My 3 goals for the organization are crime reduction and prevention, organizational excellence, and community engagement and inclusion. And this slide pretty much just shows that crime reduction and prevention is in alignment with the mayor's priority of ensuring public safety. Organizational excellence is in alignment with police accountability, and community engagement and inclusion is in alignment with the mayor's priority of enhancing livability here in the city of Portland. We've submitted a budget with requests that not only address these priorities, but again, as we move on to the next slide, which we've done here, and I'm not going to go through each and every one, it shows how each of our asks align. We're not asking for anything because we just want to be the big fish in the pond. We're asking for resources to get our jobs done, not only to be in best practices of 21st century policing, but also to ensure that we continue towards our progression in attaining compliance in the DOJ settlement agreement and ensuring that we are working in an equitable environment within the city. Throughout the coming year, we'll be working with community on a 5-year strategic plan to make sure that it not only aligns with what we're asking, but it provides strategic direction for the Bureau in the next 5 years. So the huge discussion around this, when we talk about staffing, I think there's some bit of a misconception in that we're asking for staffing to bolster our retention. That's not what we're asking for staffing for at this time. You were very gracious in assisting us with our retention needs and our incentives with the PPA contract. This is a capacity versus demand issue. we have two distinct problems that we've had to solve. And again, the first one was with succession hiring, and that's what we talked about and addressed in the fall bump, or we did our best to address with the fall bump. And that was to address succession hiring to keep up with sworn attrition. Again, that had been solved by the current contract, and it also gave us additional background investigators and a more efficient recruitment and hiring process. But what we're talking about today specifically relates to the growing gap between demand for police services and the level of authorized staff to address that demand. That's what we're talking about today. These requests are the first element in a 5-year plan to right-size the Bureau's authorized staffing to respond to the community's increasing need and demand for 21st century community policing principles to be enacted and services provided. The next slides show how we've gotten to this point today, and we're going to do an analysis of trends over time. So this is what you're looking at now. Since the 80s, the 1980s, the population in Portland has risen steadily, increasing by over 50% from 1989 to today. And the stats that we're using here were the latest census stats. So I think we go back to 1990, and the last number we have in 2016 was about 636,000, almost 637,000. But then you add on to that, the next slide shows you that although total reported crime dropped by a total of 25%, you'll see that it's been trending upwards for the last 8 years or so. Then you overlay Part 1 crimes and crime rates. And you'll see that although the Part 1 crime rate has dropped by nearly 50% and appears to level, it's important to note that this is a rate. It's a rate only. The fact that it's leveling means that the total reported crime and the population are both growing in proportional rates. So this slide tells us that our authorized sworn members per 1,000 have decreased by 20%, and it's continuing its downward trend. The current ratio is 1.45 sworn staff per 1,000 residents. So while there's no specific ratio of authorized sworn per 1,000, what's helpful to look at is that while all of the other trends are going up, the authorized staffing level is going down. And that might be okay if the demand for service was going down as well. But it's not declining as the population grows. And if you look more closely at the last 9 years, that's not true here in the city of Portland. So looking at the next slide, please. When you look at the next 9 years, or the last 9 years, very specifically, this is the same information, but only honing it down to the last 8 or 9 years or so. You can see here the 20% increase. Again, overlaid with the fact that total reported crime has increased by more than 25%. The crime rate, again, which factors in both the reported crime and population growth, is also trending upwards. And this, again, shows that crime is growing at a faster rate than the population. And then our sworn staffing is trending down. Now, add that yellow line, when you add the total number of dispatched calls for service, you'll see that our dispatch calls for service have increased by more than 25%, which indicates a much higher demand for police services. This slide gets into trends of dispatch calls for service by priority type, call type, and response times. So in a nutshell, the total dispatch calls for service increased by 25% between fiscal year 2011 and 12 and fiscal year 2016-17. It really represents an increase of almost 50,000 dispatch calls. And there's been increases in higher priority calls that have a greater impact on our resources because they either require multiple units to respond or they take longer to address. All other dispatch priorities increased during the same time period, some more than others. And the priority level assigned to certain situations, I think it's important to know, is reassessed from time to make sure that the appropriate levels of resources are dispatched to the situation. I think it's also important to note that calls for service, regardless of the call type, come with an expectation that there will be a police response. So we don't have the ability to not respond as police officers or as a police bureau. The impact of that is our response time might be increased, but we still have to go. And again, we talked about how officers are being tasked with resolving increasingly complex situations now. The nature of how we police is changing, not only due to livability issues, but just the nature of our work, and that's not just here, that's anywhere. We have more complex report writing requirements that we do that takes a little bit longer, and there's also the internal expectation that our own officers do a good job of articulating the decisions that they make. The biggest increases that you'll see here in call types were in those related to disorder, crime, and traffic. Our disorder calls increased by over 30,000 since fiscal year 11-12. Crime calls increased by about 7,500. And then our traffic calls, as you can see, increased by over 4,000. And this increase were in calls to report traffic collisions, including injury crashes and hit and runs. During this time period, serious and fatal collisions also increased. This bar graph actually demonstrates how long it takes for us to respond. So when you look at the red in the bar, that's how long a call sits. The gray is how long it takes for us to get there. And over the last 5 years, call response times across priorities has increased. High priority calls are being dramatically impacted by longer queue times and longer travel times. We also know that low and medium priority calls have the most dramatic increase in response times. So if you want to put it another way, this is about 169,000 callers who are waiting longer for basic police service. Now, I know there's also a question that had come up before about the status or an update on the community service officers. Now, a CSO program, I think, would be very helpful. But many of these situations are too risky or need follow-up with suspects or some other services that CSOs just can't provide. And although we've made some headway into the program as far as where we are with classifications and the onboarding process, we're still a ways to go. And a small amount of CSOs really will not do much of offering a big dent in the challenges that we're discussing here today. So ultimately, what does right sizing get us? We hear a lot about community policing, we hear a lot about 21st century policing, but I can't stress enough that we have to give officers the resources they need in order to do what we're asking them to do. So not only does it improve our response times for reactive services, and reactive services meaning just basic calls for service. Someone calls 911, we go and we respond. But it also increases our capacity for proactive service. That means building in additional discretionary time for officers to get out, be visible, be present, interact, self-initiate. and actually get out in the community and engage. It also helps us with attaining our goals and our priorities. It improves livability, it supports community engagement efforts, and it enhances accountability. When we talk about response times, it gets us closer to under the 5-minute high priority response times goal set by the Council for Reactive Services, which is to say community-driven 911 dispatch calls. This slide here shows about in 2020, we'll begin to see some sort of difference. It would tailor down. This is where we would like to be. We'd like to see the trend line go downward as far as our call response time. Again, it gives us more time for proactive policing and allows officers the time that they need to self-initiate and be community policing officers. We're frequently unable to meet our minimum staffing levels because we're increasingly reliant upon overtime to do so. And I know overtime is a bad word. No one likes overtime. I don't like overtime. But in order to get the presence that we're asking for, that's what we have to do. And when we're speaking overtime now, we're just talking about basic filling of districts and making sure that our officers aren't left out there without cover close by. This slide is a summary of what the average patrol officer's 10-hour shift looks like. If you look at the first column, this shows us where we are currently. This is without overtime and with our current workload and configuration. Administrative hours pretty much speaks to when an officer is down, whether they're doing report writing, have a lunch break or a rest break. Report writing obviously speaks for what it is, so I'm sorry, take report writing out of the administrative hours. It's really the downtime that they need to meet with supervisors anytime that they're not out on the street responding for calls for service. Response time and proactive time, I think, are self-explanatory. Under the current methodology or the current model with the staffing that we have, if we build in the discretionary or the proactive time that we want them to have, which is about 45% of their 10-hour shift, we'd have to add about 4 hours of overtime to each officer's shift, and they'd be working 14 hours a day. With the right-sized bureau, staffing-wise, we can get them that 45% of proactive time without overtime, and they get everything done that they need within that 10-hour shift. So again, the goal is to not only be right-sized, but it's to do it in a very fiscally prudent way. We do not want to rely upon overtime to do it, not only because it's just not, it's cost prohibitive, but we're also mindful of the well-being of our officers in burnout. So again, same thing here. This is what we see happening over the next 5 years. This is how it would unfold. The Bureau's proposed 5-year plan for increasing authorized position incrementally grows the Bureau to achieve the goal of 547 patrol officers by fiscal year 2023. Patrol work drives demand for other police services and support. We know that. But the Bureau cannot simply add patrol officers without adding resources to facilities, fleet, professional staff, investigative support, dedicated resource units, and other technology needs. We want to be part of the city's bigger infrastructure plan, emphasizing community engagement and inter-bureau collaboration. The first years, you'll see are really heavy on adding officers in patrol because we can't promote officers or enhance investigative or dedicated resource units who are important follow-up measures to the initial taking of a call out in patrol until these slots in patrol are first filled. And then we also have to be reminded that it takes about 1.5 years to train an officer once we get them on board. Command staff added in year 3 are required for opening a new precinct, commander, captain, and lieutenants, and there are also command needs within the investigative support requirements. So I will open it up for questions. I am assisted here by Ms. Catherine Ryland and Assistant Chief Chris Davis to answer any questions that you may have about our ad packages, our reduction packages, or just if you just want to know what the heck we're thinking.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Fritz?
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you for the presentation and the explanation. That makes it much clearer. The proactive time sounds like a good thing. Are there studies that show that it does in fact reduce crime rates?
The answer is yes. I wouldn't be able to cite them off the top of my head, but I'd be more than happy to provide them for you.
Yeah, I would be interested in that. And also to the you said it's 22% now, 45% desired. I'd be interested to know how we came up with that. And then in the proactive scenario, there's fewer dispatched call responses and more and therefore less report writing. In the proactive scenario, if you could get me the information about, does that actually result in fewer reports, as in, we're being proactive, are we stopping crimes or are we finding more crimes? So I'm interested to know why the report writing, or whether that's just a function of we're not being dispatched as much.
It is. So the reason, there's 2 answers to that. So we can partially answer your first question based off of a study that was done in the early 2000s, I believe, long before I got here, by the Matrix Group, that offered the 45% proactive or discretionary time and why that would be impactful. And I can turn that over to Chief Davis. And then the report writing was included in that time because it's just something that they do in their 10-hour shift. There's no way around that. So we have to look at basically all the factors in an officer's 10-hour shift to see where we can give them more proactive time. So I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, the bulk of the question is around the proactive time.
Well, I'm assuming that the report writing comes from being dispatched. There was a crime, so you've got to write a report about it. If you're if you're doing proactive time, you're not necessarily writing a report with had a chat with Joe the butcher.
Well, you can be, because if you're self-initiating activity, so remember, we get to a call whether we're dispatched or we can stumble upon it, we can be flagged down. There's multiple ways we can arrive at a situation that calls for a report.
So then I guess my core question is, why would there be less reporting? Because they're not being dispatched to calls, but they're going on more self-initiated.
The report writing time, we didn't change that much. What you saw fluctuate was the proactive time. The goal is to increase the discretionary time.
Well, on the chart, the report writing goes down, and that's why my question.
Okay, well, let's go to that.
So the shorter answer first. When we did the Matrix study a few years ago, one of Matrix's recommendations, and they said in the report that it's based on a nationwide best practice that officers have, and it's a range of proactive time, but in our case, Matrix recommended 45% of the officer's day be proactive time, and that's the time we get to define. And that can be defined as all kinds of things. It can be defined as proactive DUI enforcement, or traffic safety work, or meet and greets, walk and talk activity in the neighborhood. For the slide that you're referring to where we estimated report writing time for our officers is one of the hardest things for us to nail down. And so these are very conservative estimates about how long officers actually spend writing reports, because the way it normally works is officers will not show themselves as busy in the dispatch system while they're writing reports, because they need to be available if another call comes in. And so we've very conservatively estimated how much time we think that they spend writing reports. I can tell you from my own experience, it's probably more than the 2 hours that we've estimated right now on average. But
all my question is about why it goes down when they're doing less dispatch.
Because you have more officers handling the call load. Self-initiated activity will result in a lower rate, we believe, of reportable incidents in a shift. It still can result in some, but a self-initiated activity might be a little less likely to generate a report than a call for service. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does, thanks. And then I think one of the other big policy questions which you didn't go into, which I don't think we should resolve today, is the issue of body-worn cameras. And the last time I was at council, we allocated ongoing funding, and we said don't spend any of it yet until we come back and have a policy level discussion on do we actually want to do this, because we had conflicting advice from the community. The City Budget Office has reported on a bigger study that again questions whether body-worn cameras are effective at the things that it was hoped they would be. So this is a really large line item and a significant amount of time that would be invested to doing it. So Mayor, I would suggest we have a public hearing sometime relatively soon to decide, do we want to continue moving forward with body-worn cameras, or is this something that is now, given the data storage, the public records request, the prevalence of smartphones that even my 8-year-old mother has one, I would doubt that she'd be able to actually get the video to function. But, there was a case last week where community members were filming an officer. I just think that that's a policy question that we should take up sooner rather than later.
I had a question. What is defined in the term disorder? Does that range from domestic violence calls to public inebriation, or, how big of a catch-all is that disorder category?
Disorder is things like disturbance calls, welfare check calls, public inebriates would be included in there normally, depending on how the call comes in. Something that doesn't start out as a report of a crime.
Is it domestic violence calls? Does that fall under disorder too?
It could, yeah,
okay.
Depending on the outcome.
And my other question is, what is the intersection of the optimum amount of overtime for an officer? Officers have expectations that they're going to derive a certain portion of their income from overtime. So if we're wildly successful in our hiring goals and overtime correspondingly reduces, what's that point below which it becomes a concern to the rank and file?
So I think that's a fair question, but it's a rather philosophical question in that depending on the audience, or, if you ask me as the chief, I would say I would love to operate without overtime whatsoever. Overtime is an unfortunate need just because of we just don't have enough people and time in the day to get all the shifts that we need filled. But at the same time, it's not a right. It's a privilege, and it's not an entitlement. So I tell people, don't live beyond your means if you don't have to. Hopefully you shouldn't have to. But it's not something that should be built into your budget, because at some wonderful time we can figure it all out and figure out how to work very efficiently without overtime. So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question because I'm not a huge advocate of it, but I understand that it's a necessary evil.
Okay, thanks.
Here. Commissioner Fish.
Chief, I'm looking at your ad packages, and unless there's a dramatic change in our forecast, we face the prospect of having to take some general fund cuts in other bureaus to fund ad packages in public safety. So we're going to have to obviously look very closely at the asks and make some tough choices. The Budget Office is recommending about a fifth of what you're requesting in your first ad package, which is adding sworn positions. And they're also recommending no new funding for your fifth ad package, which was enhancing neighborhood livability and walking beats. Now, I can tell you that we hear from a lot of people, and not just small business people, but also community members, that they would like to see our officers walk in a beat. And that's sort of like going back to the roots of community policing under Bud Clark. So you have before you what the Budget Office is recommending, and we have to sort this out. This is your chance to tell us what you think of the pushback on your asks, not to just single out the Budget Office, but there's a disagreement between your bureau and the Budget Office that we have to resolve as if we're going to get a balanced budget here. And second, I'd be interested to know that in the event that we had a limited amount of money to invest, whether you are, you would seek to have all the money into your first ad package, or whether you would envision a scenario where we put some money into ad package 1 and some money into community policing.
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify, and I'm not mad at the budget office. They had a job to do. I totally get it. But I will put it out there that they work very closely with us, and we're willing to collaborate, so I appreciate that. The biggest takeaway, if nothing else, is we keep talking about community policing as if it's a thing or a line item. We need the resources in order to do the things that envelops community policing. That means we need the people to do it. So around the holidays, we committed to being highly visible in certain portions of the city. We didn't have the luxury of having people available to do it. We had to rob Peter to pay Paul to make it work. So something, it basically came at the detriment to somewhere else, meaning that we didn't provide services in a manner that we wish that we could have provided services in another part of the city in order to have higher visibility and a walking presence downtown during the holidays. That's just the reality of it. In order to be able to do that on a consistent basis, we need the officers that we're asking for. Now, when we're talking about filling the patrol districts first, that's just basic. Making sure that we can get to these calls when we're called in a timely manner. Then, from that, if we have extra, then we can bolster our walking officer capabilities. The communities that work really well with their NERT officers or service coordination teams, our behavioral health, all these things that the community praises, they all come at a cost. Those aren't officers that are assigned to regular patrol units. Those are extra. So in order to be able to continue to provide the services that we are in a humane manner, outside of just enforcement, outside of just responding to calls for service, we have to have the ability to fill those functions in those units. So it's not, I don't see it as an either or. It's critical in the sense that if we continue to funnel our efforts in the areas that the community wants, we all want it. We want to be seen. We want to provide services. We want us to see us outside of our uniforms. They want us engaged. We want to be engaged. We want to have a day where it's not murder, death, kill all day long. But it's ebbs and flows. And the ability to be able to do that means that we have to have the officers out there to be able to do it, but also provide the basic service of responding to calls, 911 calls. So that's the first part. The second part, I would say, and the reason why we emphasize this so much in our presentation, is it's about staffing. So the first package, it really addresses the bulk of our position requests. So I don't want to put myself out there and say, well, if you had to go with one, then you know. But the priority for us truly is staffing. And if we can find other ways around the other asks that we made, we'd certainly be willing to do that because we are totally cognizant of the fact that this money all comes from the same pot. Totally understand that. But the criticality today is the ability to answer calls for service and to continue to provide the services that we've been providing and hopefully enhancing our visibility and being present in preventing crime.
So that's a very thoughtful answer. Thank you. And you've given us a lot to ponder. Can I ask a follow-up question, sort of unrelated? We keep reading in the paper that this administration wants to make an example of sanctuary cities. And it appears that the only way they can do that in the short term is to penalize cities and states that have taken that action by withholding some discretionary law enforcement grants. Have you been advised that any of the grants that you rely on to sort of fill the gaps are at risk in this budget cycle?
Would you like to talk about the cops grant, JAG?
Catherine Ryland, Fiscal Manager. We receive JAG funding.
JAG refers to?
Justice Assistance Grant. And we've received JAG money
for as many years as I've been here, at least 8 years. We did apply for this year's JAG grant. We haven't been told that we're not going to receive any money, but we also haven't been told that we are going to receive money. The deadline that we've had in the past for receiving notification has come and gone. So we did have a request in our budget for funding for the LifeWorks program that our sex crime team is associated with.
And how much was they asked?
$110,000.
And if we're not successful getting that grant, does that mean you have to find those funds from existing budget?
Well, it was recommended to be funded by CBO, thank you very much. But if we didn't get the recommendation and don't get the money, we'd have to make the decision of continuing that program or not.
I see.
And might I just add, too, going back to your original question, you know, I talked about the ability to provide services and keep up with demand, but it's also doing it in the way that we're asking them to do it too. So think about it, you know, you can have all the officers that you need that are on overtime filling these districts to make sure that we get there when we need to get there. But if they're tired, if they're burnt out, if they're overworked, think about what their decision-making process would look like, right? Think about that, the message that it sends to them, and then on top of that, I'm saying, I want you to do it with a smile. So it's not just the ability to provide services, it's also ensuring that we show we value our employees and their well-being. And I just wanted to make that clear as well.
Rob?
This question is more addressed to the CBO and in regards to the body camera program. Your documentation talks about both the Rialto study and the Washington, D.C. study, and points out that the latter was more methodologically robust. I'm just wondering if those are the only two studies that are out there. I was able to find a bunch of other studies on this topic, and it seems like a little bit of cherry picking. So I'm wondering if it's your sense that there's a consensus on whether or not body cameras yield better outcomes for both the police and for the people they serve, or if we're still at a place where no such consensus exists. And then I have one more question, but it's not for you, so.
Katie Shifley, City Budget Office. I wouldn't say that there's a consensus right now, and even outside of sort of reductions in use of force or citizens' complaints, there's still a lot of other reasons that you might want to have a body camera program. But this is the most recent study that's the most methodologically robust, and it did sort of counter a lot of the prevailing sense, rationale for having body cameras that was out there. So you wanted to highlight that. There's still limited research on body cameras programs in general. And actually, sort of the crux of our recommendation is that should we decide as a city to move forward with this program, we should really be engaging with our academic partners and contributing to that body of research that's out there and evaluating whether or not we're sort of getting the outcomes out of this program that we expect to.
So if I could just add a little color commentary. I'm aware of the studies and the counter studies, and even the study that concluded that there really was no difference in behavior on the part of officers with or without body cams in a controlled study. Their very last sentences in the study said, but you should still do it because the public feels like there's more trust, more transparency, and more accountability. So I thought that was a weird twist for a scientific study to say we have all this data and it doesn't conclude that it works, but you should still do it because the public sees it as a transparency and accountability tool. So my view on this is rather than go whole hog, because it is a very expensive proposition, is that we first communicate with a lot of different communities that have already done this, communities that have had successful rollouts like Fullerton and Anaheim, communities that have had direct experience, including the chief's former city of Oakland, and we're also deploying to some cities that have rolled it out and then pulled it back. and then re-rolled it out like Seattle to find out what their experiences have been. I would propose that if we go forward on this, and it has been my firm belief that we should continue to go forward, we do it on a pilot basis and make sure that we are satisfied that given state statutes, which are different here in Oregon, given the technology and data management challenges that continue to exist around body cams generally, and given public input on this process, let's see where it takes us. The reality is that the data is minimalist at this point. It's really hard to draw a conclusion one way or another based on one or two studies, in my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, that's reassuring. My second question is for the chief, which is if the council were to approve or substantially approve the staffing plan that you have put forward, would that eliminate the use of retired officers being paid at the highest level on an ongoing basis, which has, I understand, been the practice for some time and is quite a pricey one?
I'm like, is she writing the answer to that over here? Yeah, thank you. I know what I would say, but I need the technical answer, and I'll follow up on what they say.
So retire rehire came about really because of a different problem that we had, which was filling vacant positions. As long as we have the ability to fill vacant positions in a timely manner, and as long as we can somehow get out of this boom and bust of hiring cycles that we have, eventually a program like retire rehire wouldn't be necessary anymore. Where a program like that becomes attractive is when you have a lot of vacancies to fill all at once, because then you get the alternative of having somebody in one of those vacancies who doesn't take 18 months to train. One of the things that we're trying to get at beginning in this budget proposal is the idea that we always have a certain number of officers in that training pipeline. So at the staffing level that we're looking at for 5 years out, that would be about 75 officers in a training pool. Right now, it's 60. And there's some complicated math that someone smarter than me used to figure that number out. If we can get to the point where we pretty much always have that number of people in the hiring or in the training pipeline, then we would do away with these shocks in attrition that make something like retire rehire attractive. Does that make sense? And so that is one of our goals over the course of this 5-year plan, but that's a longer term problem to solve because it's a 25-year cycle from when someone's hired to when they retire.
Let me just add up really quick, follow up with that. I want to remind everyone that the retire rehire program is at the discretion of the chief of police.
Commissioner Daly.
Hi, Chief. So I remain very interested in the rationale behind our staffing levels for police. I know that certain types of crime, person and property crime, is on the rise after years of decline. And I think a cursory glance at those numbers might suggest, well, we just need more police. But for me, I need to understand the root cause of that increase in crime. How much can we simply attribute to population increase, for instance? It's just a per capita rate. How much can we attribute to worsening socioeconomic factors like growing income inequality, lack of economic opportunity, lack of affordable housing, et cetera? And I'm particularly interested in how many of these increased property crime calls are associated with auto theft, because as we know, unless we're going to stick an officer on every block to catch someone in the act of stealing a car, actually I don't even know if that would help solve our problem at the state level. Anyhow, and then the third piece of that, so it's what's driving the increase. How much of it is associated with auto theft, which is kind of a unique situation for us because state law dictates that we can't arrest someone even if they're in possession of a stolen car.
The high threshold.
it's a high threshold, because they can claim they didn't know it was stolen. It's nonsensical, but it's real. And then the third part of my question is, we are gathering data, but we're not analyzing it. So we currently aren't really doing intelligence-driven, predictive policing, which I think could impact our staffing needs in a positive way if we were using our officers more efficiently. So sorry for the long-winded, winding question, but it's all very interconnected in my mind.
Actually, it is very interconnected, and I would even say socioeconomic factors have something to do with crime, whether it's increased or decreased, right? And I don't have the answer to you today as far as specifics as to what's driving it, but we do know that it exists. And I've had some great conversations with community members that share your questions. And one of the questions asked of me was, well, if we solve the livability issue, will that help decrease your crime numbers? Because we know that there are some crimes associated with the house's populations, but they're low-level crimes. And if you address that, the root cause, then the crime will go away. That's not really an issue for me as the police chief, because I have to deal with the issue right now today. So we know that we didn't get where we are today in a matter of 5 years. It took over a period of years. And I am the fire chief, actually. It's a public safety matter. We have been at the table discussing livability issues because we don't want to criminalize the house's population. But the reality is that there's still crimes occurring, and I have to deal with it. And it's not going to be solved in the next year, 2, 3, or even 5, right? I would like to say that it is. So what we're addressing, or what we're offering today, what we're asking for today, is to allow us to address the crime as it occurs, because we know it's not going to be resolved in a short period. This really is a short-term fix. Hopefully, in the end, all of the other socioeconomic factors that we know have a relationship to crime, whether it's education or, poverty level or all of that stuff, over time that will be impacted. But again, I have to concern myself with what we're tasked to do. I wrote down there was something else. Oh, predictive policing. So since I've gotten here, that's actually the direction that I've given. Strategy is huge in what we do, but it's even more important when you don't have all the resources that you need. You have to make sure that our efforts are intentional, but we also have to make sure that we're not policing in a disparate way, and we're not over-policing certain populations. So even if we did have full staffing, or if we didn't have enough staffing, how we police doesn't impact the amount of officers that we need. Using predictive analytics or using all of the information that we have available to us, which is what we have been doing since I've gotten here, again, doesn't change response times. It doesn't change the number of calls for service that we get. Those are things that are outside of our control. Now, making sure that the outcomes are what we want them to be, and that we're not policing in a biased way. Again, that's all front-end stuff. That's how we do it. But again, it doesn't change how often people pick up the phone and call the police for services. So it's important, but they're not, one doesn't really have anything to do with the other.
Yeah, I have one more comment and one more question. I certainly appreciate you wanting to be able to address the demand that exists right now. I think our challenge really is, in a budget cut year, where will that dollar be most effective? Is it prevention? Is it in homeless services? Is it in police? And that's what I'm struggling with, and that's, that's really the crux of all my questioning around the rationale for staffing levels. So my second and final question is, there's a lot of confusion about our community policing plan. Could you just in a nutshell tell us how many positions are currently being funded or will be funded, what those officers will actually do, how it will help alleviate burden on our, if they're not, whatever the opposite of community policing officers are, and when those positions will be filled, because I think we're still in the hiring phase.
We're doing a good job with actually attracting and hiring people.
Okay.
But again, as it currently stands, we can only hire up to our current authorized strength. What the 93 additional, and then I'll turn it over to you two. What we're asking for are 93 additional sworn positions and 9 additional non-sworn. Of that 93, the breakdown would look like this: 81 for patrol and neighborhood response teams, 4 to enhance our training efforts, 6 to enhance the emergency management unit, and 2 to enhance the behavioral health unit. Those are the sworn bodies. The non-additional or the 9 additional non-sworn positions would be to support, their support positions, to support the emergency management unit, to support the behavioral health unit, and to enhance the capabilities of our auditing team, which is all tied into the DOJ.
Okay. And what's the current staffing level for the, aren't there specific slots for community? No.
So I want to make sure we don't look at it as officers assigned to just do community policing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, because there could be a misconception or a misperception that we'd be filling specialized units first without addressing the patrol needs, and that's not the case. So first priority is to make sure that all of our districts meet minimum staffing levels in patrol. Now, once we have more officers in patrol, that generates more reports, or it could go back to the question as, or does it? And that's something we have to circle back on. It's a fair question. There's more investigative work to be done, which means there's investigators that have to have a decent workload so they can investigate these crimes and get them presented to the DA's office for charging. So it's a trickle-down effect. And then, again, walking units, neighborhood response, so on and so forth. So we have the ability to add to these specialized units that are out in the community, but the basic ask is to make sure that we fill the patrol at minimum staffing first. So it's not to say that we are doing this solely to create another unit, if I'm clear on what your question is. I might not be, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Commissioner, are you also talking about community service officers? Is that part of your question?
Yeah.
Because that's, I think, part of mine is, and I asked the fire chief this, do we really need a sworn firefighter to do the community medical services? We've invested a lot of taxpayer money in the contract, which includes allowing the community service officers to come on. You know, for things like the car thefts, it seems quite reasonable that somebody who isn't a full officer would be able to go take the reports and do some of the work. So could you talk a bit more about how, you mentioned that in your report, but
I did.
How could this play into the whole issue of being out in the community, being a more friendly face, doing more of the proactive work?
And I'll turn it over to Chief Davis.
Because we currently have none of them hired yet, right?
That is correct. That is correct. None hired. I think we are now, I think it's up to negotiating salary, so there is movement in that. But again, the number of CSOs, and I actually think, and I think you and I had talked about this before, past life, previous agency, we had a similar position. They were great for handling calls that had been standing for a long time, which we would refer to as a cold call or a cold report, or to be put on a perimeter post, so we didn't utilize a sworn officer for long periods of time. So there's certainly a value add there. But given the slide that we showed with the increase in high priority calls, CSOs wouldn't be able to respond to those as well. And the small number, I don't think, would have a huge impact right away. But I'll let Chief Davis talk a little bit more about where we are with the CSOs.
So as the chief said, we've been working with BHR and with class comp, and we've ironed out a draft of a class spec, and then the next step is to talk to PPA about that, work on, salaries obviously have to be negotiated with the union, and that's one of the next steps here. At the same time, our training division is working on what the training program looks like, what kind of equipment needs that they'll have, and the goal is to have all those different lines meet at one point. The most time-consuming and difficult part of this is ironing out all of the details of a position that hasn't existed in the city before.
Okay, thank you. And then also following along from Commissioner Ujeli's comments about the root causes, one of the things that we could do instead of having more police doing more proactive time is to look at some of the other ways of outreach. And I know that in Oakland you were familiar with the ceasefire program.
Yes.
And looking at how do we actually provide services to our high impact, just like the fire bureaus looking at their high volume callers and how can they better help them. We've got some high risk folks, and the council during the recession chose to invest in parks programs for teens in particular, which has actually proven successful in helping them have something positive to do rather than getting into trouble from being bored. So is there, I don't see that in your budget request to move more into expanding programs and services for high risk offenders.
No, it wasn't a specific budget ask, and we haven't met yet, so I don't want to speak on it in a public session because I haven't had a chance to speak with her about it yet. But collaboration is key in a lot of this. So yes, I'm talking about staffing, but again, it's for basic patrol services and to get the stuff done that we need on a day-to-day basis. We have had to rely upon partners in order just to get a lot of our stuff done now today. But you mentioned ceasefire, it's very successful in Oakland. A lot of prevention efforts and the decrease in recidivism that we experienced had a lot to do with collaboration with partners. And hopefully that's not a huge budget ask or requirement from us because that's funding and programs that already exist. Part of my goal of community engagement and inclusion is working with our partners, not here just at the state and federal level, but at the local level as well. And ONI would be a huge part of that. And was the police bureau in Oakland very much involved in that ceasefire program? Yes, we ran the ceasefire program. It was all coordinated through the police department and human services. Be very interested in hearing more from you about that and looking at could we expand what we do here. Absolutely. Thank you.
So I have a question about the specialty units, and I'm just reading the CBO's report here, and if I'm kind of reading between the lines, but are you saying if you don't get the money from us that you need for minimum staffing for patrol, that you would eliminate the traffic division? My hope would not be to eliminate, but generally that's the first thing that we would look at would be specialized units. We can't continue at the pace that we're in, so we would have to eventually cherry pick from our specialty units, not necessarily traffic, but that would be one that we would look at. For elimination or just reduction? Well, we'd start with reduction. Reduction, yeah. But I couldn't promise that we couldn't eliminate. Yeah, I just noted, in your presentation, that was one of the areas where it's going up the most, I guess, safety related around traffic issues. And I guess I've always been schooled that it's better to have officers who are specifically trained to do the driving under the influence test and all that so that they'll stand up in court and all that. Yes. As opposed to having it sort of every officer's responsibility, that we're not as successful in achieving our goals that way.
I agree. I'm glad you brought that up. Could I just follow up on that question? Because we've got $500,000 in ongoing money from the cannabis tax for that kind of enforcement. But if we're talking about, and so I hope we'll have that discussion of how we're going to allocate the cannabis tax money this year. If we're talking about cutting the traffic division, I think we've got to have a hard discussion about do we continue funding the service coordination team, which City Budget Office is proposing to use 1.4 million, no more than that, nearly $2 million of cannabis tax money for the the service coordination team. I have been a big supporter of that program, and I know for the individuals who it serves, it's been life-changing, and in terms of getting ahead of recidivism and all those things. On the other hand, if it's that or stopping DUIs and speeding, I think that's a discussion we need to have.
Frida?
I'm going to ask different questions. I'm kind of a techie person, so
Uh-oh.
No, I'm not going to ask you that detail. I was listening to the fire chief, and they are looking at efficiencies and using technology for efficiencies. And when you come to report writing, a lot of it's administrative. It takes a lot of time. What is the Bureau doing in regard to trying to streamline things to make it more efficient in those aspects? It's not going to take away from having to necessarily go out to a high emergency call or anything, but it might trim some time.
No, and since that's your bureau, I'll turn it over to you. But I do want to say that's a very good question, because we talk about 21st century policing. It's not just community engagement. That's one aspect. Technology is also a huge piece of it. Training is a huge piece of it. Officer safety and well-being is a huge piece of it. So that's also something that I hope to see us utilizing moving forward, and as a strong recommendation coming out of our strategic plan that's coming forward. But I'll let Chief Davis talk about what we're doing now.
Sure. So specific to report writing, there are a couple of things going on. We have a report writing platform right now. The contract for that is up with the vendor in 2021, I believe it is. So we're looking already at, is that still going to be the best option for us at that point? We don't know. So we're looking at what other options are out there, because report writing and records management system technology has been evolving so fast. And it's still in the hypothetical phase right now, but one of the things with the body-worn camera work that we're doing is not just looking at where the state of the technology is now, but where it will be 5 years from now. And if you talk to people in the body-worn camera industry, for instance, they'll tell you that they envision a day where your body-worn camera will actually help you write your report. You stop and you get a traffic collision and you get someone's driver's license, and you're able to hold it up to your body-worn camera, it reads it, and starts auto-populating your report, almost like Alexa for your police car. That's all, we call it vaporware right now. Nobody's invented that, but that's what the conversation is in that part of the world, and our profession is certainly one that will benefit in ways you and I probably can't even envision now in the fairly short term from technology. And so we're keeping our eye on things like that, balanced against the typically very high cost of stuff like that. But yeah, that's a big part of the discussion.
And my other question, this is more from a personal experience, is, and I know you haven't been on the job that long and you're still assessing things, is about 2 years ago we had a break-in in our shed. And I'm savvy enough, I'm not calling 911, I'm calling non-emergency. And I didn't need a police officer, truthfully. There wasn't a lot a police officer could do. But they still sent one out to take the report. Are you looking into the future? Because there's a lot more people like me that on a non-emergency thing that would be easy for me to go online and just fill out what happened and all that information. You've got your report, and no officer had to come out. Or they could assess at that time whether they felt they needed to come out. Are you heading in that direction?
We do that now. We have online reporting that's taking an increasing number of calls. You have to be careful with that, because you can have things slip through the cracks and get reported online that had you sent somebody out to ask some questions, you could have found some solvability factors. But the short answer is, yeah, we're definitely doing that.
Could I just add, you had started trying to play a 911 call at the beginning of this conversation, and it was a carjacking that was in process. How long did it take to dispatch a police officer?
Well, Mr. Mayor, the reason why we chose that call was to do exactly what you're asking. We wanted to demonstrate how long it took in order for an officer to be dispatched and arrive to take that call. we set an alarm for ourselves because when that time was up, we were going to say, this is how much time has elapsed, and we still have 1 minute and 30 seconds left to demonstrate when the officer actually responded on scene to take the call. It took 1 hour and 3 minutes for the officer to be able to not only be dispatched to get there, and it was because they had to come from another part of the southwest area because they were held up on another priority call in the area. It wasn't because they were off having coffee somewhere or just lollygagging. It was due to lack of availability. So the reason why we chose that was to demonstrate the response time issue that we're dealing with right now today.
So, and I'm sorry for jumping on your punchline, but that's illustrative that of the time from when we were going to hear that call until 1.5 minutes from now is how long it took to respond to an active carjacking call. So the reason I mention it now, Frida, is a lot of the types of direct community engagement services that used to exist do not exist any longer. And as I think about the settlement agreement with the Department of Justice, as I think about the demands of the community in terms of police transparency and accountability, the farther we are away from direct interaction, the harder it is to rebuild that community trust. And it's harder for our folks to know exactly what it is the community they serve needs if they're not actually out there in the community. And so that's a great example of how we can use technology, but it's not going to replace, I don't think anytime soon, actual human-to-human interaction.
Just one last comment since you brought up that community piece. You wouldn't know, but I'm from East Portland, where the biggest population, most diverse population is, and a lot of immigrants and stuff. And I work with East Portland Action Plan and with Civic Engagement, which is our multicultural committee, you might say. And we have various people from, whether it's Latino, Russian, Arabic, you name it. And we've been very active in getting people on citizen committees and advisory committees. But we've had a couple on the police, one of their advisory committees, and they didn't stay very long. And I know, having worked in schools for many, many years in a volunteer capacity, is the making people feel welcomed. And they felt marginalized and therefore didn't stay very long. And I don't know if you have plans to work on that aspect, because it's part of getting the community involved, is also making them feel welcome and wanted, and their ideas and voice respected so they can speak up.
The answer is absolutely I do. It's all part of what we're talking about. It's, again, what we want them to do. It's not only them feeling welcomed, but it's giving them the time that they need in order to stay long enough so they can feel welcomed. But again, when we're talking about trust building and relationship building, that takes time. So they have to be given the discretionary time to be able to do that.
May I
yes, Kofi.
Yeah, I have a question about staffing. How long in average does it take the police bureau to hire an officer, from applications to offering the job before the training?
That's one of the areas where we've actually made a lot of improvements, and we've got it down. And I apologize, I don't have the exact scientific average, but it's roughly 6 months right now.
6 months, okay. So before you have access to, the number of officers allowed, it will take about 2 years.
Yes.
So I want, the decision makers to keep that in mind, that before the police bureau can meet at least the minimum required officers, it will take them 2 years. And if they have to come back every year to request the number of officers, I think it will be very hard for them to meet those requirements. So I have concerns about the fewer number of positions recommended by the CBO. That's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, that's correct, Kofi. And adding to that is the reality that demographically, a lot of police officers are retiring right now. Now, the opportunity, of course, is we can recruit young, diverse candidates with a different skill set, and that bodes well for the future. But in the meanwhile, we're certainly pinched. Very good. Any other questions before we wrap this up? Thank you, Chief. Thank you, AC Davis. Appreciate it. Next up, Bureau of Transportation. All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Director Treat, for your patience. We got a little behind schedule early this morning. Thank you for being here. Bureau of Transportation.
Great, thank you so much, and good afternoon. So in our budget request, we have three main priorities that are reflected before you. One, we are investing in road maintenance and capital projects to repair streets that are in poor condition and build new projects that bring our infrastructure up to modern standards. Two, we have to have safe streets. The budget before you continues our commitment of eliminating roadway fatalities by 2025. And finally, in this budget, we're making the investments that will help keep Portland a livable city with a high quality of life as we're growing and changing. We are committed to supporting citywide priorities. You have made addressing the lack of affordable housing an urgent issue, and our budget reflects this in a few ways. In support of the city's affordable housing efforts, PBOT is a co-lead on the mayor's fast-track permitting pilot. We've continued to make affordable housing development a priority in all aspects of permitting, including allowing impact fees to be waived for affordable housing development and reducing UVE lease rates for affordable housing projects by 50%. Thank you. I didn't know who the wizard with the thing was. We also are supporting affordable housing through our planning and policy activities. Studies have repeatedly shown that transportation and housing costs make up the lion's share of most household budgets. So if we can lower transportation costs, we can make an indirect but a very real contribution to housing affordability. One of the key ways that we can lower transportation costs is by providing safe, convenient alternatives to incurring the cost of owning and maintaining a personal car. So this is one of the reasons that we are partnering with TriMet on the Enhanced Transit Corridors Plan. Through this plan, we're identifying where we can give priority to transit on city streets, and doing so is going to better support TriMet's frequent service network by getting buses out of congestion, making public transit more reliable and efficient. We also contribute to reduce transportation costs by expanding the infrastructure that makes walking and biking a safe alternative to personal automobile use. For example, through Gateway to Opportunity in outer Northeast Portland, we'll invest tens of millions of dollars to expand the area's bike network and improve the crosswalks. These investments are also going to make it easier to access transit available. As the challenge of homelessness has grown, so has PBOT's contribution to the city's response. In the coming fiscal year, we project that we're going to spend close to $4.5 million on homelessness response. We've been centrally involved in the city's efforts to clean up campsites, and the budget before you continues to fund these efforts. Due to the dramatic increases in the costs of these services over the last year, we are very supportive of OMF's request for additional general fund monies to support the immediate response cleanup efforts. If that request is approved, it could save us close to $1 million that could then be reallocated to asset management, Vision Zero, and congestion mitigation. We've also increased our efforts to respond to the presence of derelict RVs on neighborhood streets. These RVs have become one of the most visible manifestations of Portland's homeless crisis. As part of the city partnership that has responded to derelict RVs, we have taken 2 steps. We've hired more inspection officers to speed the ticketing and towing of abandoned RVs so they can be removed quickly from the streets. And we've worked with the Portland Police Bureau and One Point of Contact to create a community caretaking program, tow program. This program addresses the RVs that are occupied, creating a system that allowed for the removal of those vehicles that presented an immediate threat to public health and safety. Through this program, we addressed 149 cases last year. In this budget, we're requesting 6 positions and $1.5 million in general fund monies to continue these efforts in the coming fiscal year. Without these positions, existing staff from parking enforcement are going to continue to be devoted to RV removal instead of parking enforcement, resulting in about $1 million of lost revenue in our budget. Many of the challenges that we face as a city cannot be solved by one bureau alone. And that is why you all have rightly directed us to break down traditional silos and collaborate on citywide solutions. In the last year, we have worked together with our sister bureaus on many fronts. I've already mentioned our efforts on campsite cleanups and mitigation of RVs, but last year we also launched Get Portland Moving. It was a regional construction coordination initiative. We partnered with city bureaus, county, state, and transit agencies. We brought a new level of coordination to construction and maintenance projects on the streets in the Central Business District and in the Cully neighborhood. And by doing this and working closely with other agencies, we estimate that we saved $5 million in cost avoidance. We've also continued our longstanding partnership with the Water Bureau and BES. PBOT surveyors provide the bulk of survey services for BES on sewer and stormwater projects, and PBOT maintenance and operation crews provide paving services to both Water and BES. Also, PBOT and BES are currently in our second year of a joint leadership team initiative. The team is tasked with identifying joint funding opportunities and realizing project efficiencies through closer collaboration. This has proved especially effective on the Capital Highway Improvement Program. Due to our working closely together to provide the community a safer, more efficient street, it also is going to have state-of-the-art sewer and stormwater infrastructure. And last, in an effort to improve the overall delivery of city capital projects, staff from PBOT, BES, and Water and the City Attorney's Office have gotten together to write, review, and update the city standard specs, which is used on all capital projects by all the bureaus. Since our participation in the Smart City Challenge, we have also worked closely with other bureaus, regional agencies, and the private sector to advance our efforts to use cutting-edge technology and data resources to modernize our infrastructure. We also want to expand service delivery and improve the customer experience. To support citywide racial equity goals and strategies, we're collaborating with the Office of Equity and Human Rights, Portland Parks and Recreation, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, Bureau of Development Services, Portland Police, Portland Housing, and BES on the completion of the action items in our bureau-specific racial equity plans. These are just a few examples of our partnerships, but we continue to look for innovative ways to work across traditional organizational lines. Each year, as we budget to most effectively maintain our assets, we face a fundamental challenge. Our infrastructure is deteriorating faster than we can preserve and maintain it. Over the last 2 years, we have received new sources of revenue that are going to help us, but by no means solve our maintenance gap. This includes the Fixing Our Streets program and the Build Portland program, and also the state legislature's transportation package of Keep Oregon Moving. Taking all these new funding sources together, we still face a maintenance backlog of $2.2 billion over the next 10 years. Understanding that, we are trying to use these funds as efficiently as possible. We absolutely want to get our biggest bang for the buck, so we're focusing on projects that provide a triple win. One, they have to address a maintenance problem, they have to improve street safety, and they have to help us meet our multimodal goals by improving biking, walking, and transit. So Build Portland is where we've had the most success in identifying triple wins. An example is the Lentz Town Center project, which will improve the bike facilities and implement the Lentz Town Center Business District Transportation Plan with new traffic signals, pedestrian amenities, wider sidewalks, pedestrian crossings, and street lighting. The project on Outer Stark will construct new sidewalks and crossing improvements and provide bicycle facilities from 108th to 162nd, making one of Portland's deadliest streets safer and more attractive. The general fund capital set-aside is another important source of funding for us. In the coming fiscal year, we will use these funds for traffic signal reconstructions and upgrades. With the reconstruction funding, we will rebuild and relamp traffic signals across the city, including several locations that require immediate attention. With the upgrade funding, we will leverage funds from developers that they are required to invest in signal improvements associated with their projects. We're going to build on those investments to upgrade an entire intersection and improve traffic flow, safety, and development potential all at once. In this way, PBOT is responding to failing signal assets in a very strategic and cost-effective manner. I would like to take the opportunity to point out two things about the general fund set-aside program. First, the CBO did not recommend funding for ADA curb ramp improvements. The justification for not funding our request was noting that we had not spent last year's general fund appropriation for curb ramps. As you know, we just negotiated the settlement with Creek. As part of that negotiation, Creek demanded to be a part of deciding which ramps got built first. The consent decree was just signed in the last week, and now we're moving ahead with expenditures. An RFP has already been issued, design is underway, and construction will start in July. With another appropriation this year, we could further enhance our response and fulfill the terms of meeting our settlement more quickly. Yes?
So could you just explain that? So on the previous page, you've got $10.5 million under Build Portland. So why are those two not interchangeable?
Oh, yes, so the $10 million that is in the Build Portland is restoring the $2 million of ULF funds that were taken out to fund Build Portland. So on an ongoing basis, that money was taken from our budget and we took it out of curb ramps and we need to backfill that. So we're using the Build Portland money to backfill what was taken out.
And that's $10 million over 5 years, so that's where the $2 million. Okay, thank you for explaining.
The second element of the general fund set aside to highlight is that the project scoring doesn't favor paving projects and preventative maintenance. We can prevent very costly future rebuilds by investing in preventative maintenance now. Last year, we completed a number of Fixing Our Streets projects, and I know this map is small, but there's a bigger one in the handout that were given to you. This year, we're going to be even busier as a number of major projects break ground. The Fixing Our Streets program allows us to expand the kind of preventative street repair that saves money and makes it easier to move goods and people around the city. And it also funds much needed safety improvements in neighborhoods across Portland. With the state transportation package, Keep Oregon Moving, we're going to support a number of projects that you can see on this slide. We're also going to use the funds to support our asset management activities that includes deploying new pavement preservation techniques such as slurry seal. And we're also going to use the asset management funds to grade and gravel unimproved streets throughout the city. Protecting Portlanders from traffic violence is one of my highest priorities. Thanks to your advocacy in the state legislature, we will be able to lower the speed limit on all of our residential streets to 20 miles an hour. Judging by the number of the 20 is plenty signs that are popping up all across the city, this change is resonating with Portlanders. We have 3 Vision Zero related decision packages in this year's budget. First, we're requesting $650,000 to install a safer pedestrian crossing on North Columbia Boulevard near George Middle School. In August of 2016, a student was seriously injured when he was struck by a car near this intersection. Second, in investigating fatalities and serious crashes involving pedestrians, We have learned that low lighting is often a factor. To improve lighting at intersections with a high number of nighttime crashes, we're requesting $750,000. And third, dangerous driving behaviors and impaired driving are two of the major contributors to fatal and serious crashes. To confront this problem, we need to better educate Portlanders about safe driving practices. Our third package requests $500,000 to fund a driver education campaign to be conducted in partnership with the police and fire. The campaign will build on the PSA campaign that we're sent to launch on April 2nd. A key focus of our work has been institutionalizing equity in everything we do. In the last fiscal year, we began implementation of our 5-year plan to advance racial equity. We have over 40 action items, and it involves every major work group in the Bureau. Thanks to the dedication of staff, we were able to make progress on more than half of the action items, including making a concerted effort to increase our MWESB utilization rates. I would, though, like to recognize, thanks to the work of the Bureau of Human Resources, they have started to provide demographic and statistics on our hiring practices. With this new statistical tool, we have learned that we have a long way to go. Over the last few years, our rates of workforce participation by African Americans, Latinos, and other ethnic and racial groups have not grown as quickly as we would like them to and are not reflecting the statistics in the general population. Bettering our record in this area will be a task for us in our recruiting efforts in the coming fiscal years. Part of our equity work involves focusing our investments to better serve areas of the city that have been historically underserved by our transportation programs. For example, as part of our Vision Zero initiative, we're investing $40 million in safety improvements on our high crash corridors. Of that, $22 million will be invested to make streets safer in communities of color and in neighborhoods with a significant number of low-income households. These are the areas that are highlighted in gray on your slide. Providing greater contracting opportunities.
I'm sorry, Director
Yep.
Treat. Did you say that's Build Portland resources going into those? I couldn't hear what you said right up front.
The $40 million is probably from a bunch of different buckets of funding, not just Build Portland.
Okay, thank you.
Are you bonding your cannabis tax money?
We have not decided to bond the cannabis money. We're debating the Build Portland, right?
Cannabis money is all going to the Safe Routes to Schools education. Yes. Jeremy Patton, Business Services Manager, PBOT. So right now the marijuana tax money is going around safer routes to schools and other safety projects, so we're not planning on bonding any of that money at this point.
Yeah, we might want to, I think that's something to be discussed if we're going to get to zero by 2025, getting the improvements done sooner rather than later, and if we can assure you that you've got that consistent funding. It seems like we could, well, we discussed last year there were a capacity problem, right, in terms of, yeah, okay.
Thank you. So providing greater contracting opportunities for MWESB firms is one of the citywide racial goals that we have taken very seriously. In line with this goal, we have increased our MWESB requirement on our PTE contracts from 20% to 30%. And currently, for last year, our MWESB utilization rate for PTE contracts was over 40%. Portland Progress is our strategic vision and work plan. The first iteration of the plan guided our work in 2015 and 16, and starting in January of this year, we began to implement the second iteration. As Portland grows and develops, we have to take proactive steps to meet the diverse mobility needs of all Portlanders. We also have to position PBOT as an organization that can deliver a top-notch transportation system that serves the region. Portland Progress 2 is made up of 6 strategic initiatives we are pursuing to meet these goals, and as you can see from the dashboard, we have made significant progress across all 6 strategies this year. For my last slide, I'd like to end on a happy note and highlight some of the projects that we completed this year that enhanced the quality of life in our neighborhoods, made our programs more accessible, and in general, improved the experience of Portlanders as they use our transportation system. We launched Adaptive Bike Town to open the unique Bike Town experience to cyclists with disabilities. We introduced Parking Kitty, our mobile payment app featuring a local cat wrapper to make it easier and more fun to park in Portland. We installed the historical Black Williams Project to honor the rich history of Portland's Black community on North Williams Avenue. We encourage Portland kids to ride their bikes to the library with our Bike to Books campaign. We celebrated the 10th birthday of the Portland Aerial Tram and of Sunday Parkways. We completed the 20s Neighborhood Greenway project, which added 9 miles of north-south connection to our bike network. And we awarded $100,000 in small community grants to community organizations and neighborhood groups to support projects to make local streets safer, more attractive, and more livable. And with your continued support, I look forward to bringing new examples of community-enriching projects to you in 2019. And if I could, before we take questions, I have members of my Bureau Budget and Advisory Committee who would like to give a brief presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is your time. Good morning and welcome. And if we could just get your names for the record when you start. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tom Karwacki, and I'm with the Bureau Advisory and a Budget Committee. This is a committee made up of about 20 citizens and stakeholders from throughout the city. And we start our meetings, we're very encouraged with safety and equity as being PBOT's top priorities that the director has set. And we start each meeting with the naming of the people who have died on Portland streets, because safety is important. And to speak to Vision Zero, Arlene.
I'm Arlene Kimura. Good morning, everybody, or is it afternoon? I don't know. We want to thank you all, and I want to ask your support for Vision Zero. I understand that the CBO has made some recommendations to reduce the funding to Vision Zero, particularly with the Columbia Crossing at George Middle School, but also to cut out the lighting that is needed. The street lighting with the LED lighting has done a marvelous job of highlighting the road bed, but crossing from the sidewalk is still dark, and I think that roadway design needs to include sidewalk redesign, including pedestrian level streets to get safety. We just lost another person on Division Street, our high crash corridor. Previous to that, and about a month ago, we lost somebody on Stark. And while Powell is not a PBOT road, we also lost someone on Powell. Thank you. And I want to turn it over to Rob Martineau.
Thank you.
Member Rob Martineau, a member of the BBAC. And we're clearly here to push back on some of the CBO's recommendations. In one instance, it took a $41 million ask and turned it into $7.5 million. Certainly the ADA ramps is a big part of the Vision Zero and everything that needs to happen in Portland to increase mobility and transportation. And I would say a curb is often viewed as a brick wall for somebody with mobility challenges. It becomes not an option. And that doesn't always mean somebody in a wheelchair. It may mean a walker or just being able to step onto and off of a curb. The recommendation would stop 1,250 new corners in Portland from becoming ADA compliant. The greatest need for these improvements is in the areas that have been historically underserved, and we would like to see the investment in the community continue. The board also talked about the public perception after the passing of the gas tax to see a reduction in frontline services after an increase in revenue. We don't think would be popular or in line with what the city of Portland voters have authorized. We just would like to encourage you to continue to work on the city's values and their goals around equity for all Portlanders and honor the commitment we have to Vision Zero. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are also joined by Tony Lamb, our co-chair.
Thank you very much, and I would just like to second what's been said by my co-chair members, our desire for investment in Vision Zero, ADA curb ramps, and BES assisting with taking care of the street cleaning and maintenance.
Very good. Thank you, all of you. And we appreciate your service on the advisory committee. We know it's long hours, it's hard work, there's a lot of self-education that has to take place, and the pay is not very good. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's good material. Great. I'm using humor, and Commissioner Fish is heckling me over here. You already said that this morning.
All right, we're at your mercy.
All right.
Here.
Commissioner Fish.
Director Tweet, let me begin by saying, on behalf of the Bureau of Environmental Services, we deeply appreciate the strengthened partnership between our two bureaus. And not only has that meant more LID projects that Dan has brought forward with creative funding, but it has also meant that we have done a better job coordinating capital construction projects with neighborhood business districts and others, and there's a plethora of benefits from us working closer together. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
I have, I want to briefly address the street sweeping issue because I've been on the council long enough now that it almost feels like Groundhog Day. It's budget time and now we're talking street sweeping. The challenge that we have at BES is that with the completion of the big pipe, we're less reliant on street sweeping generally to protect watershed health. But Andrew has decreed that our two bureaus sit down and talk about how we might fund this, so we look forward to doing that. And we should do that probably sooner rather than later, just to figure out what a partnership would look like. I have two questions for you. One is, I was surprised by some of the pushback, some of it in the media, when we adopted the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit under our Vision Zero goals. And I guess I want to just give you a brief moment to address that. Some of the criticisms were that we essentially can't social engineer how fast people drive, or that basically 20 means people will drive at 25 or 30, or there isn't enough science to say that, you know, it's good. I mean, from my point of view, it was a very important step. Do you have any response to some of the criticisms we've received?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, first of all, it's the right step for us to be taking. We're signaling to our community that we expect people to drive slower on our streets, and that our residential streets, especially where we have families with children, that it's really important for people to be driving slowly on those streets. Some of the criticism was also that the majority of serious injuries and fatalities aren't happening on those streets. To that I say, that's great news, and we want it to remain that way. And lowering speed limits is a way to ensure that our streets are staying more livable for people. I mean, there is there's truth in how speeding tickets are issued. I mean, there has to be a certain threshold of going over the speed limit for the police to be able to hold up that ticket in a court of law. That's a simple fact. So if we're reducing the speed limit from 40 to 30 or 30 to 20 or anything, it's still reducing the amount of speed that people will be going on the street and lowering the threshold for the police to enforce. So it's absolutely the right thing to do, and I think we should continue on these efforts to try to get more authority on the arterials and on our highways. And then we still have the responsibility for, like, the three things that are going to get people to slow down is education, engineering, and enforcement. We have to have that trifecta.
One of the things that I really enjoy when I occasionally drive, which is increasingly rare because I don't have a car, is when someone doesn't like the fact that I'm driving 20 miles an hour on one of those roads and guns it to get ahead to the next stop sign and beats me to the stop sign by about 3 seconds. I hope people feel very virtuous doing that. And it's just ridiculous. We have a big conversation ahead of us about how we're going to continue to regulate TNCs. Now the additional complicating issue is whether we're going to have an autonomous vehicle future. Let's put autonomous vehicles off to the side because there's obviously a lot of regulatory work that has to be done. And let's talk about TNCs, in particular, whether we have the right mix of safety standards and what kind of robust community oversight we're going to have going forward. When can we expect PBOT to come back to council with to begin that conversation?
I believe we are looking at an April date to come back to council for an update with the TNC regulations. We can get back to you with a specific date after the... Oh, I'm sorry. Chris now says it's May. So we're looking at May.
Okay.
To come to council.
Chris or Nick, depending on which guide you look at, because his picture has been substituted in for my picture in a local guide. Chris, is that going to be a time? It's hilarious, but I get a lot of compliments, and then they see me in person and they go, "Oh, you were better looking in the notebook." Chris, will that be a time certain, hopefully like on an afternoon?
I believe we secured a time, yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Frida? Please.
Commissioners would have some more questions. First of all, as part of East Portland, we really want to thank you for all the investment you've done out there. There's still a lot of work to be done, as we know. And so I was kind of wondering, because I'm looking at your two maps here and trying to pull them together. Are you working with the East Portland in Motion Part 2, I guess we called it, since the one got through when you're picking this?
I think
projects?
So I believe you're looking at the Fixing Our Streets map, is that correct?
There, you've got two
So
maps.
there's two things. Yes, we're working with East Portland in Motion. We have staff that are dedicated to working with them to evaluate projects, select projects, and everything for implementation in East Portland. For the specific map, if it's the Fixing Our Streets map, those projects are designated in ordinance, so we can't change the projects. When we went to the ballot with the proposed gas tax increase, it included a list of projects that would be funded by it, so those are set and won't be changed.
So it was actual streets versus so much in sidewalks and...
Well, there are a couple of buckets, like we put, roughly $8 million in Safe Routes to School, so we can then invest it in schools throughout the city of Portland and so much in sidewalks. And certainly East Portland is an area where we know there are a lot of missing sidewalks, but also Southwest, so we're investing based on that.
Because I'm looking at this issue of fixing your street map, and thank you, now I can tell people that 136 is going to be repaved this year, because I get that question all the time. I go, I think at a meeting I saw it was on the list, but I can't say for sure. But when it comes to sidewalks and safe routes to school, I'm not seeing any projects in the, what I would consider be between 120 Second, 136, and Foster, and let's say Powell. And there is such a lack of sidewalks, and especially on Ramona and Holgate. There's 3 schools, and we're talking about shifting times and stuff, and we're actually constrained because there isn't sidewalks, and can the kids actually walk to school safely if it's dark? You see what I'm saying? So I'm just kind of curious. I didn't see any dots.
So this, I don't believe this map has all of the projects. I think this is street preservation and maintenance, and it's not the Safe Routes to School. It's
so
not
it's
on that map,
missing.
and there are certainly investments going into East Portland for sidewalks and access to David Douglas Park, Rose, Portland Public Schools,
Yeah,
et
I
cetera.
assumed there was. It was just, that's what I was saying. It didn't look like you have all your low income out here, and yet the projects didn't seem to be commensurate. If you could get me a list of those projects.
Certainly.
Because being on the Douglas board, I am constantly asked about this, and it would be nice and easy if I could just send them a list and say, hey, this is what's being done.
We will do that.
But I do appreciate all the work transportation's done to increase their investment out there.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, my first question is for Dr. Treat. On the slide for the capital set-aside requests for street lighting safety, it says there was a $600,000 request, which the CBO didn't recommend anything. I thought I sure heard you say $750,000, though, and that made me wonder if we were talking about something different than this capital set-aside.
I believe we had 2 separate requests. Which one are you looking at? There's a decision
There's
package.
one for $600,000 on slide 12, and then I heard Director Treat say $750,000, which was for something else.
There are 2 separate asks. We made an ask of the one-time general fund capital set-aside, and then we also, as a decision package for one-time general fund money available for all bureaus, made an additional ask through that for $750,000.
So they're 2 separate things.
Correct.
Okay. And my second question is for CBO. I noticed that at the end of the paragraph at page 3 where you said the city should investigate opportunities to assist the Bureau in scaling up its activities. That's at the end of a write-up that's talking about capacity issues within the Bureau, which is the primary reason for, or at least a contributing factor to the unspent money that's been allocated by council over the last few years. And I'm just wondering, is your intent here is to say that they should be, PBOT should be working with the OMF's Department of Human Resources to come up with some better strategies to make sure that they can recruit and hire into these positions, because it's been kind of an ongoing issue for them?
Yeah, Jessica Kennard, City Budget Office. Yeah, essentially, I think that there's probably a lot of different options. I think we flag in the review that this is not a problem that's unique to PBOT. Typically, whenever a city bureau has an influx in resources, there's a bit of a challenge or a lag in scaling up. So it wasn't anything specific. I know that actually the Bureau of Human Resources has a new dashboard up that's actually super informative, and I think it's really helping the Bureau identify some areas. But it was more a broad statement. This is an issue that perhaps we as a city, if there are opportunities for more centralized assistance to help them scale up more rapidly, that we certainly in our office are interested in helping them achieve that.
Sorry, I was just going to go, but thank you, Jessica. Just going back to your question about capital set aside, I also wanted to remind the budget committee that these capital set aside programs do get ranked according to the criteria, and so we work with the capital asset managers to go through that ranking process. So when you say CBO recommendations, we are actually forwarding those recommendations. I think Director Treat pointed out that, and it's a valid point, that some of the paving projects don't score as high. One of the things we've really worked on over the last few months, and will continue to work on over the next year or so, is doing some revisions to those criteria to make a little bit more of a robust business case around asset management, which may change some of those things. Again, the scoring criteria is very transparent, so we can sort of show what they're based on, and its safety and its risk, et cetera. But I do just want to sort of note that these CBO recommendations are coming from that larger process. I did want to ask one question about the ADA ramps. Does PBOT know what the total request is here in dollar amount to fix all of the city's ADA ramps moving forward under the settlement agreement?
No, we don't, but the settlement that we reached with Creek is we're going to have to remediate all the ramps in the city within 12 years. So we estimate that's going to be anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 ramps a year over the next 12 years.
But is it safe to say that that's tens of millions of dollars?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We've already fixed all the cheap ones, too. So they're just going to...
Yeah. Because I do want to point out, just in terms of this, I mean, this is something that we struggle with as well. Of the capital set aside, PBOT is getting or recommended to get 68% of the Build Portland funding. I think it's around 60%. So significant resources, going into these projects. Still not enough to take care of sort of the AD ramps and other things. And so I think that's one of the big picture questions for council, is just how much of the one time goes to transportation versus some of the other things in the city.
So I have a question on this. So if I understood the conversation correctly, you said that we are required by the federal government to install those ADA accessible ramps. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if we are required to do that, what assumption are we making by not providing an appropriate capital set aside?
And just real quickly, the settlement agreement was just signed in the last week. So when the reviews were written a few weeks ago, we had not finished that settlement agreement. We noted that in our review as well.
Okay, and so then can you help me understand what does that mean in terms of us apparently not meeting the standard? What does it mean?
So the federal government recently revised the standards for ADA ramps.
Okay.
And it's been incredibly expensive for cities across the country to get up to speed. There's this organization, Creek, that has successfully sued LA, Denver, Seattle, many other jurisdictions, and they have gotten multi-million, even billion-dollar awards by going to court and litigating. We've learned the lesson from the other cities when they came in and noticed us and said, we found 10,000 ramps in the city that aren't up to the new standards. Let's negotiate. And so instead of going to court, we've been working with them over the past year to come up with a settlement agreement to avoid the litigation and to come into compliance with the federal standard.
Will that extend the timeline then?
Nope. So we just negotiated over the past year, we negotiated a 12-year agreement with them to come into complete compliance throughout the city.
Okay, and so are you saying, Director Scott, that the CBO recommendation is not in accordance with that settlement agreement?
I would say, given the information we had at the time and looking at the $5 million that had been, had been allocated and not spent, and knowing that this is a tens of millions of dollars problem, we did not recommend additional ADA funding. And again, given that the settlement hadn't been entered into, now that it has been, I think that is the question, for your budget and for council is how much of this should be allocated now, and really what's the 12-year plan, right, for getting this done. And I will note, limited resources, so the more we do on ADA ramps, some other projects will need to come off the list.
I think presumably the council has to adopt that settlement agreement, right?
Yes, you will.
So maybe at that time we ought to be looking at what are the possible sources for funding it and how we're going to do it, just like we did when we got to the Anderson settlement agreement. We had a kind of a concept of how we're going to pay for that.
Yeah, it would be useful to, as I work on my draft of the budget, to know what we are required to do. This morning we had a conversation about a significant investment that was a life safety investment. So I think we all know we're going to do that at some level and probably find some creative ways to finance it. These other types of settlement agreements and decrees and everything else need to be worked in as well. So I'm just putting that in the parking lot for you. Could I ask a question? Oh, sorry,
one other quick question. As far as numbers, we're looking at about from 66 to 123 million for the 12 years in order to address all of the ramps in the city.
Which is a lot.
How
and
much?
So I assume if we're going to enter into an agreement, it's an agreement that we actually think we can live up to our end of the deal on.
66 million?
66 to 123 is the range that we have a lot of assessment to do.
Just a question, because, okay, do you have to put the ramps if there's no sidewalks? Just because the feds and them get really weird requirements. And I happen to drive down Market, and there's 4 corners with nice ramps, but there's no sidewalks going to those ramps. So I'm kind of curious on this settlement. Are we?
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. Does that figure incorporate all corners?
I don't believe that if there's not a sidewalk that we have to put a curb ramp there. As with existing sidewalks, there has to be a curb ramp, and I don't know what I'm imagining that's a development issue, but I don't know.
All right, and then I just had a very quick question. So under Build Oregon, there was $1 million set aside for Northwest 23rd, and then in your request around the capital set aside for Northwest 23rd for paving was $4.25 million. What is the difference? What would you do with the $1 million that came through Build Oregon?
Emily answered.
I'm sorry, Oregon Moving. I'm killing their branding here.
So for Northwest 23rd, are you referring to?
And I'm sorry, could you state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Emily Tritch.
Thanks, Emily.
Peabot Asset Manager. Good afternoon. Are you referring to state funding?
Yeah, so
Oregon
the state funding the Oregon, Keep Oregon Moving in 2018, the House bill added $1 million investment for Northwest 23rd. And I'm just curious to know if you're estimating that the paving would cost $4.25 million, but the state only gave you $1 million, what do you do?
So Northwest 23rd between Lovejoy and Thurman requires a full rebuild. Anyone who's been on that segment knows that there's numerous deficiencies that the Bureau's been addressing for decades. We've been providing patch repairs, spot improvements, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in temporary fixes. What we were proposing through Build Portland and through the capital set aside was a full facelift, a full rebuild, including a signal upgrade at 23rd and Thurman. If we only had $1 million, what we could do is provide additional grind and pave, which again is a temporary fix, given that there is steel rail underneath Northwest 23rd that must be removed in order to provide a more long-lasting solution. So the question is, do we provide a temporary fix that buys us 5 more years? A much better 5 years, to be honest, than what we have today. Or do we go whole hog and provide a more permanent fix that would really serve the community for a longer period?
Very good. Thank you for that clarification.
Can I?
Yeah, please, Commissioner Daly.
I just wanted to note the, ADA ramp funding issue. Of course, it's of interest to me as a disability advocate and someone who struggles to walk with my son in my own neighborhood. 12 years is an accelerated timeline. $66 million is a lot of money, but the ADA was passed in 1990. And I feel like this is an excellent example of how we really need to start dealing with our long-term liabilities and setting priorities, because we would be looking at less than $2.5 million a year if we'd started when we should have. Not to admonish anyone in this room, but I think a sidewalk ramp sounds unimportant to the average person who doesn't need it, but it's really impacts a lot of people's lives. I think 7% of our population has a significant mobility challenge. And if you're traveling on wheels, no ramp means either a dangerous maneuver to get off the curb, or it means you don't walk in those neighborhoods. And that has a real impact on people's quality of life and their health, etc. So I know it's not an exciting prospect to spend that kind of money, but it'll make our city so much more livable for a lot of people.
So I agree completely, and I guess my only request to CBO is long-term. It's somewhat concerning that something that we are required to do shows up as an optional add-on to the budget, when in fact, if we're entering, and Commissioner Fritz is correct, the council hasn't actually signed the agreement yet, but let's do a thought exercise. If we do sign that agreement, we've committed ourselves to it, and therefore it should be built into the preliminary budget numbers. It should just be taken right off the top. This and whatever else we are required to do, rather than playing this game where we presume that we can take shortcuts on agreements that we've entered into.
Well, and to be clear, we're still obligated to make these improvements,
Absolutely.
Settlement or no settlement.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's exactly right. And I think now that there is a settlement agreement as part of the adoption of that agreement, and we are happy to help, PBOT with this, is put together a funding plan that council commits to. And when a funding plan is in place, we certainly, can allocate the needed resources every year. Just want to stress that things are moving as we sort of go through this process. So,
Commissioner Fritz?
Is there any gas tax money that was allocated to the ADA ramps?
Yes, we're currently using, like, when we build a project with any source of funding, if we're hitting the ramps, we're building it. So in addition to what we've asked through for the capital set aside, through Build Portland, through the state transportation package, through our own capital money, we're putting in roughly 750 ramps a year with existing funding and existing projects.
But specifically, is that an allowed use of the gas tax money? I know we had a long discussion about maintenance versus new stuff.
I don't think there was a specific bucket for ADA ramps, was there?
I don't think there was, no, not in the state package, but it is gas tax eligible because it was within the right of way. So yes, it would be gas tax eligible.
And I forget how we, I know we promised the voters a certain mix between maintenance and new projects. How do you prioritize each year on the project list?
For the Fixing Our Streets gas tax?
For the gas tax, right.
Those projects were set in charter. So I guess I don't understand what you're asking. I mean, there's a specific set of projects.
So the gas tax is for 4 years, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've basically, these are the projects are the projects and there isn't any flexibility.
Correct.
If we were to renew it, we could potentially, that could be part of the funding solution.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Very good. Anybody? Frida?
This is more Powell Boulevard, I know is the state, but it's also in this Keep Oregon movie funding. And I was told at one time, once that passed, there was some discussion of PBOT trying to get them to pass through the money so You could do the improvements versus the state. Has anything occurred on that, or is the state tends to be slower? So that's why I'm asking.
There were some early conversations about the city taking on that project, and in the end, it was decided that ODOT should deliver the project for various reasons around stormwater infrastructure risk, delivery to a legislative time frame, et cetera. So it's staying with ODOT. Yep.
No.
Quick question. I'm curious about the lost parking enforcement revenue item on the homelessness slide. Why is that
How does that happen? So we've taken 6 of our parking enforcement officers that are dedicated to ticketing and towing RVs, and we don't get any revenue from that. And so it's lost revenue from ticket citations that they would have otherwise generated.
And do those, I imagine those positions more than fund themselves. Okay, thank you.
So is there an ask then for additional capacity for parking enforcement?
We made a general fund ask to replenish those parking enforcement officers. So no, but not out of our general transportation or parking enforcement revenue, because I don't know if we've done an analysis of whether if we hired 6 more people, it would make up for the cost of sending the 6 people over to the RV enforcement or not. Can you answer that?
Yeah, I would think Jeremy Penn again with PBOT. For the positions alone, just for the cost, they're probably on an average of $150,000 per position bringing in revenue. They'll bring in slightly more revenue than their costs, but at that point, it's not a large amount in that margin between the cost of the position and the amount of revenue that the average revenue they bring in.
So you have your parking app now, Parking Kitty. Does that help address this problem?
It actually doesn't, because we still have to enforce the payment by the app. So they're enforcing whether people have paid parking or not.
So I'd like a deeper, not today obviously, but I'd like a diaper, oh geez. I just don't even know where to go. I just don't even know where to go. I would like a deeper dive on this particular issue for the executive budget, and I'm asking the question, should we be asking for additional parking enforcement? Thank you.
Will do, thank you.
Anything else? We really want to end it on that? All right, folks. Thank you all. It's been a long, long morning and afternoon. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Woohoo, lunchtime.